Board of Trustees is hereby called to order at 6:03 p.m. The subjects to be discussed tonight are Team of 8 training with Leadership ISD, and at this time I will turn it over to Patricia.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Good. Boy, I haven't seen you guys in forever.
Feels like it.
It's so wonderful to see you all and without face coverings. So I'm glad we're all healthy. I know you guys have had some challenges with getting COVID, and so I'm glad you're all healthy. I hope your families are okay. And everybody is breathing a little bit. Breathing, literally, breathing, right? Right. So tonight we have a few things to finish up, and I don't have a clicker. I can't change. Sorry. I know, I usually wander, don't I? So let's just start with a check-in, because I haven't seen you for so long, and then we're going to just review a little bit, and then we're going to kind of dive into the work, and hopefully we've got a few things to finish up before we get to move on to like monitoring all of this work that you've been doing over the last, 6 months? Longer. So who would like to check in first? Just a one word. How you feeling? Where are you? We could go back to the compass, but hopefully you're centered coming in here on the compass, first of all. I'm breathing now. I got a little bit of traffic, so now I'm breathing, and I'm good, and I'm so excited to be here.
I'm excited to be here too.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, I'm excited to be here.
Excited, right.
I'm feeling positive.
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 Excellent. And in a good way, not
in a
in a bad way.
No,
right.
not, yeah. I'm negative, but I'm positive.
That's right, there you go.
I'm feeling relaxed. I had the day off today. So.
I want to know what movie you saw.
The new one with Tom Holland. Yeah.
Ready.
You ready?
Yeah, I guess that's a good word. I'm prepared for today.
All right, prepared.
I would say, yeah, prepared, ready for today.
All right.
It's been a while.
Get my head back in it.
Yeah, get back into it, huh? How you feeling?
I feel great.
All right, good. How about you ladies? Awesome. Oh, I like that word.
I feel good.
Feeling?
I did have the day off.
Well,
But now
not
your
the night
daughter
off.
did not. I was like, how did you? Now you're here.
Okay, so this is the work that we have left to finish up. So tonight, we're going to try and get through as much as we can, and then tomorrow night, hopefully we might not get all the way through this, but that's okay. So we're going to review a little bit, but your leadership team has been working hard over the last 3 months on the goal progress measures, and so I've given you guys some books, and in your books are a lot of different things. They are your priorities for the district. You all should have the strategic plan, so I didn't put that in there, but we'll refer back to that. They all have this, right? Yeah, good.
And anybody who wants another copy, I'd be happy to get it.
They were kind of big, and I didn't want to copy the whole thing, so since you already had one. And in there also are the goals that you have, the most recent goals that we've discussed, preliminary goals, the goal progress measures, and then I also gave you an extra packet that has like disaggregated progress measures with the targets. And also in here are some of your AE local and legal. And I put those in there as well, just to remind you, just so you have those. When we finish all of this work, we will put the goals, the goal progress measures, the superintendent constraints, the constraint progress measures, and the board constraints all in AE local. It will all, and you'll vote on it. So they will become codified and official. So that's generally, so I gave you that so you would have it. I also gave you the Lone Star Governance Manual because that is really the framework that we've been following with a few little deviations. But when we finish all of this work, then you will be Lone Star Governance certified, which is important for your leadership team because they have some grants and some things that rely on that.
Good.
So, and then I put your operating procedures as well. And then there's just in the last tab, or I think it's 6 because I didn't have 8, is just some resources for you. You know, so just, and you can add whatever you want to this book, but I just wanted you to have it so you could kind of add some things. So yeah, you have a resolution in there as well. And then there's a deep dive in inputs, outputs, and outcomes, which I think is really an interesting read. I think I've sent it to you guys, but I just put it in there. And then there is a resource page that has lots of readings and articles and things that you, as board members, I know how much you're trying to keep up on. And so sometimes these are really good resources. And I will consistently send you new resources. You know, anything that you need at the end of all of our training, like if you need any help with policy work or you want, you know, do we have an idea of this? Is somebody else doing this? You know, I can usually find those resources and send them to you guys. And then you could kind of keep them all in one place. So it's really about making sure you feel supported so that you create the conditions for your superintendent to succeed and her team. All right, so we've got our progress measures, all of these, our targets, which I gave you. We're going to discuss those tonight because I don't believe you've seen the goal progress measures in
Not
full, right?
Not
okay.
yet.
And then we'll talk about the non-negotiables, constraints that I think we touched on a little bit last time, but we didn't get quite all the way through it. So I want to get that done. And then the board non-negotiable constraints, those are just the same thing, just depends what you like to call them. And then the monitoring calendar, which is how you're going to track all of this work on a monthly basis so that you know progress is being made towards your student outcome goals. And then you'll do a board self-evaluation, which is part of the Lone Star Governance framework, and we'll score you. And then on a quarterly basis, we'll do another self-evaluation after 3 months to see how you've leaned into the work. And then all of this folds into the superintendent evaluation, so you are all on the same page, everybody. Does that make sense? All right, cool. No questions? Anything that you feel like I need to add to that book that you don't have, that off the top of your head? You can think about it too, but I'll make sure you have something. Okay, so we already did that. So we know that this is kind of our focus area. So we've been working on the vision and goals. And when we get to the values, that's really the non-negotiables. And then the progress and accountability. And that's really the framework. That is the framework that we're working in. And the evidence tells us that if we work within this framework, that we actually improve, or we support the conditions that improve student outcomes, which is what we're all hopefully in the business for, is to improve our students' experience and their outcomes. So the vision is where we want to be. So let's just look at the board student outcome goals just to make sure that you guys, these all look right to you, and they're in your book, and then you have that other sheet as well. So the first one we had talked about, which is the third grade. So the first 2 and the last one are all HB3 goals. And so your team is tracking those already, and so that is great. So the percent of third grade students that scores meets grade level or above on the STAR reading will increase from 31%, and that's the 21 number, to 45% by June 2026. So those are the 5-year goals. The third grade math goal, which is also part of HB3, will go from 21%, that is also a meets grade level goal, 21% to 42%. in 5 years. The 7th grade students, now this is a goal that you guys felt really important, that was very important to you. We had seen some numbers that were a little bit, concerning. So we wanted to you guys wanted to make sure that there was a 7th grade math goal. And so that is an approaches grade level or above. And it'll increase from 26% to 43%. It's a 5-year goal. And then the last one is your Ccmr goal, which will increase from 50 to 68%. And that is also would be tied in some cases to your bonus money, to the HB3 bonus money. I don't know if you had been able to access all of that. That's been a challenge, I think, for school districts across Texas to access all that money that's at the state. So definitely as you start to just get closer and closer to this goal and this number goes up, then you'll be able to access more of those funds, which is really, really great. Because there's a lot of money sitting on the table at the state, and we don't want it sitting there.
No, let it come
We
here.
want it in your classrooms. Okay, so any questions on those goals? They all right? Right? Seem what you remember? Excellent. Okay, so what do you guys remember about goal progress measures? What do you guys remember when we talked about goal progress measures? Anything? It was a long time ago, I get it. So the goals are yours, right? The board owns the goals. The progress measures are owned by the
On the administration.
by the administration, by the leadership team and the superintendent, right?
Right.
And so they have to, they're smart, so they need to have a baseline, a target, a population, a deadline, and they need to be predictive of the goal. So these are what you would see every month at a board meeting. You won't see every single one of these goals at every single board meeting, but we'll build a calendar, so at least 3 times a year, you will see progress on each of these goals. And those progress will come in the form of reports from the district, from the superintendent and her team, and they should be predictive of the goal. And so they will have annual targets in their progress measures as well, but they'll also have beginning of the year, middle of the year, and end of year targets. And so and this is where really the meat of your board work lives, right? If you are spending what we would love to see and what Lone Star Governance recommends, and what the research actually bears out, is that if you spend 50% of your time in your board meetings discussing your progress, discussing your student outcomes and where they are, and then you align that with your conversations about budget, your conversations about facilities, your conversation about innovation, all of those strategies that are deployed in here, they should all be tied to those student outcome goals. And that way, you guys are hyper-focused on where are we getting our kids? Where do we want them to be? And does the budget tie to that? Does the strategy tie to those? Are we preparing the facilities? Did we look at it from an equitable lens, from an equity lens? Are all of our children getting those resources? And are they all getting prepared? And you can look at that by the disaggregated targets. So you'll know if a student population is maybe not meeting their target, or if in any of these progress measures, if they're not showing up to you like they're moving towards the targets, then you know, and your superintendent knows, that that's going to be a conversation in your board meeting, right? And that's what you should be talking about. You should be saying, okay, how can we support progress on this? What's going on? There could be all kinds of things that are happening. Maybe it's a new curriculum that hasn't quite had time to be deployed, or there's a lot of different things that could affect those progress, and they don't always have to go like this, right? Sometimes they could go like this, and as they catch up to the targets, right, as the team deploys things. So that is I cannot emphasize how important that part of board work is. You know, a lot of times boards, and we talked about this, kind of this imbalance of boards across, not just Texas, but across the country, this where we either are sitting on one side where we're not really talking at all about things, we're just kind of expecting our superintendent and their team to be, you know, superheroes and to do it all, and we're just going to sit in the boardroom and, you know, good luck, go, we're going to be cheerleaders. And that really is kind of that's unbalanced, and it's not going to be beneficial to our kids, right? Because now you're in kind of an uninformed oversight role, right? And then you can lean all the way, if the pendulum swings all the way to the other side, now you get, you know, what we don't want to, but we see it a lot in Texas and then across the country, is kind of a micromanaging board where we have 7 additional superintendents. And we don't need that either, because you hired a superintendent, you trust your superintendent, and you create the conditions. But we don't, once we get too many cooks in the kitchen, that also can have a cost to our kids, right? So living in that center of kind of informed oversight is where this framework will push you towards. And that's where your conversation should be. So, does that make sense? Any questions around that framework? I know we've talked about it, but I just wanted to do a little refresher.
Yeah, just to go back, you had said that we would be voting to include these goals after we finish this program with you. Am I correct in that? So will this be part of it, or is it something else we're going to be voting on?
You'll vote on, and the way that that we codify these goals into policy is to put them, so both the goals, the goal progress measures.
So just unclear, this what you're showing right now would be part of what we would vote on, right?
With the goal progress measures.
Okay.
And the constraints.
And would we want to incorporate language to reevaluate annually these goals? I think we talked about that we would have a mechanism to reevaluate, because as we're establishing these, 5 years is a long time. I mean, we also would have to measure our progress with competitive districts, neighboring districts, and if we're still underperforming what's happening in Comal or Northside or Northeast, then we would have to possibly adjust this and kind of determine what's happening. So does that language need to be part of this so that we have an understanding that we're going to reevaluate these 5-year targets, maybe on an annual basis as we look at it?
Well, the goals are 5-year goals, and what we recommend, and I recommend strongly, is you leave them at 5-year goals. You can evaluate the targets, the annual targets, which you have on the sheet that is, like, can I borrow this 1 second? I'm sorry. Like this, it has the annual targets for you. So you could look at those. And the way that you also evaluate progress on this is through superintendent evaluation. So that is all part of a progress measuring and progress monitoring. Now, let's say you are way up, like you're already hit the goal in 3 years. Then absolutely, I would say then you would want to look at it and say, you know what, we need a stronger goal. We don't want to just flatline here. We want to continue to advance and have our students continue to improve. Does that make sense?
It does, but I wouldn't vote for this. I'd vote against it because, of course, we've had a very detailed discussion regarding what I feel we need to be and what we're settling. And I may be the only one at the end, but just like anything, you have to put your vote on the table to say where you have reservations. But if that's how that's going, then that's probably where I'll end up. But again, there's a whole process that needs to play out. I'll be open to it and see how it plays. But without an instrument, or without the ability to reevaluate these 5-year goals as we're going along, I think it almost locks us in rather than giving us the flexibility. And we, as a board, should have that flexibility to reevaluate goals as we go along.
So I understand what you're saying, and I think that the idea is, if you guys remember, what we're trying to establish is kind of this goalpost, right? So that your superintendent and the administration and their team, the educators in the classrooms, have a very common goal. They know this is where we're trying to get to. And what's happened often, and why I think we've had so much, it's been hard for superintendents to move forward to resource strategies, to implement strategies because the target moves. And if the target moves, then I don't want to be held accountable to a moving target. I'm sure you wouldn't want to be held accountable to a moving target. You want a target that you get to work for, so you give yourself the time to resource it, to implement it, to think about it. This is not going to change overnight. This is obviously student outcomes is a really, I mean, that's what we're all here for, right? Is to improve our experience and our outcomes for our children so that they have a pathway to success. And it's really hard work. And it doesn't happen like that because strategies have to be deployed. And, we could say, well, we should have been doing this, 20 years ago or 15 years ago or 5 years ago. But we're starting right now, and we're looking at 5 years, and we've got some pretty good targets, right, where there's some pretty good growth. And you guys were all a part of building those targets. You had collaboration with the leadership team. There was a little back and forth. There was a little disagreement. There was productive conflict in that conversation. You looked at your data. And so if you're gonna, if we're gonna set a 5-year strategy, then let's hold the goalpost unless your team is doing so amazing that our kids are getting there faster, then yes, absolutely, then you could readjust. But I think to try and readjust it every year doesn't even give your leadership team time to deploy strategies and then measure their impact, right? So if you're trying to do this all in 1 year, then it becomes hard. Yes, ma'am.
And so what if you get to year 3 and the goal is year 3 is nowhere being met? Do we just leave it alone and hope for the best and hope in the next 2 years that it changes and catches up?
If we're not on target?
Right.
No, that's when you have real hard conversations with your leadership team, right? Like, that's why we're going to measure progress all the way through so that you don't get 3 years down the line and go, we're not even close. We're not even close. Because if in 6 months or at the end of this year, you're not close to your targets, you're not making progress towards those targets, then you have to have a conversation like, maybe that strategy isn't working. Or maybe we didn't resource this the right way or enough. Or, so that's when you have that dialogue. And the whole idea is so that you don't have to wait 3 years, 5 years down the line and hope and pray, right, that we are going to hit those goals. Instead, you as a board are taking control of the progress monitoring and saying, we're going to make sure that we get there on every target. And if we're not getting there, it's not about blame or anything. If we're not getting there, how do we, all of you, work to make sure that whatever strategy we need to change is resourced, that is supported, if there's facility needs, this should also drive any conversation around bond. All of those things should be within this framework. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. But it just seems like that's a hard set 5-year goal plan that doesn't have a whole lot of flexibility.
Well, it has annual targets, and it's measured 3 times a year. So you do have some flexibility in those annual targets. You have flexibility in the annual targets, but you want to leave those long-term goals alone so that you see progress towards them.
Right. Because that's the ultimate outcome. So how we get there along the way then is what we're going to be evaluating 3 times a year?
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So you'll know what's happening, and you'll be able to ask those questions. And I mean, these are good questions that you're asking about this framework. And, I also think that, oftentimes boards don't, we get into that kind of side over here where boards don't ask questions, or they maybe ask questions that are not framed in these outcomes. And so any question that is asked is important, even if it's a question about budget or a question about an allocation or even a vendor should be tied to how is this affecting our student outcomes. And any question and dialogue around that is good board work and is So does that make sense?
Yes, ma'am.
So can I just kind of summarize back? What you're saying in short, to speak to Mr. Macias's point, is that if we're like hitting our goals or beyond, yes, we should reevaluate our end targets and accordingly. However, if we're not, then we should be talking about why are we not having the impact that we are expecting from the programs that we're implementing.
Yeah.
I swear I didn't do anything.
And that's exactly right. And you have tools to evaluate them, right? You have your monitoring, but you also have an annual superintendent evaluation. And that's why this framework is so critical, because it allows everybody to be on the same playing field. Everybody to and you might have additional items in your superintendent evaluation, but a true pure superintendent evaluation would only be on these things. And the constraints, right? And the constraints are the value statements. Those are the other things that are in the strategy that don't necessarily affect student outcomes. So we're going to talk about. So what is the culture that your team is creating? How are your teachers being retained? Is there, are the classrooms equitable? Are your, all of those things are value statements, and we will also build a set of those that you'll monitor as well. So there's two sides of it. There's the vision, which is the goals, and the student outcome goals, and the goal progress measures, and there's the values, which is how are we going to get there? What do we care about as a community, your community? What do you care about and how we're going to get there? Do we want to take care of our teachers? Do we want to make sure we have equity in our classrooms? Do we want to make sure that, of course, you wouldn't want to say, it's kind of a waste of a constraint to say to your superintendent, you know what, don't blow the budget. Because really, you hired an intelligent, savvy superintendent, and if you have to set that as a constraint, then you might want to reevaluate your superintendent. But this is not the case here. And of course it's not. And it's not the case in 99% of any school district. I'm just saying I don't want you to go down that path as your constraint, because that's not really a value add to your school and to your students. And remember that the values, like how we treat our teachers, how we retain our teachers, it's not a student outcome, but it drives a student outcome. Right? So it is an important component. So we would definitely want to support your leadership team, resource your leadership team around those things. Does that make sense? Okay.
So upon the adoption of this, are we also adopting the entire hierarchy? So goal, annual progress, the constraints, the guardrails, all of that gets adopted?
Yes, all of it.
So to speak to Jose's point, so if market conditions change that require us to adapt, the change usually, as a best practice, should happen at the hierarchy under the goal. Is that right? Guardrail, constraints.
At the goal progress measure or the constraint progress measure.
Okay. So the process does allow for flexibility, just the best practice is to do it somewhere other than the goal at the tactical level.
Right, unless you hit your goal early.
Unless we hit the goal.
Right.
Correct. But to account for any changes in market, and I say market, to account for any changes in the ecosystem,
Right.
there is flexibility, just your professional opinion is not at the goal, because that would be counterproductive.
Right. And your leadership team has to submit 5-year goals to the TEA. So it's counterproductive to have you on one page and them on another page. So there's that reason. And then the other one is even during, I had boards that set 5-year goals, 3 years ago. And even with COVID, right, where we know everyone, had our children were challenged, our teachers were challenged, right? And so we didn't measure all the time, and not everybody could take tests, right? We still didn't change those 5-year goals. There were some emergency things that we put in place in case there, something else came up, right? And we knew that, and you had the dialogue with your team, so it's not a gotcha kind of thing. This is we're going to work together to create the conditions for success. And so that's what this framework is. It's not about a stick or a weapon. It's more about a kumbaya, like we're all moving together to get here. And that doesn't mean that you won't have disagreements on the strategies or the resourcing or the implementation. And that's where you have productive dialogue in your boardroom around that.
I appreciate everything that you're saying, but I'm also a little confused.
Okay.
Because what do we have? Do we currently have 5-year goals?
No. I mean,
So
the leadership team may have them, but your board does not have them.
So this is something that's all new, something we're starting.
Yes.
Okay, see, that helps me out a lot, because up until now, I have no idea what you're talking about. So that clarifies a lot.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah,
No,
so.
no, it's not you. It's what we've been given, or at least me, or not given in this case, so thank you.
Yeah, and you're welcome. And I think it's a good framework. And your team has had goals, of course. They've had goals, but oftentimes, look, we talked about this way early on too. Your superintendent, now you have a lot of superintendents come from their communities and they stay in their communities, but some of them don't. Some of them come from somewhere else. We've got a lot of superintendent searches going on, right? Mm-hmm. Those superintendents come from somewhere else, but you guys don't. You live in your communities. Your children and grandchildren and nieces and nephews and friends have gone through this system, and you understand the values and the vision of your community. So it makes sense for you as a board to own those 5-year goals and to create the conditions for the team to implement strategies to get there, right? Not to tell them how to get there, but just say, this is our expectation. This is where we'd like to be for our kids. But you own that, because that's what a board does. That's part of your responsibility.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
What I would say is, and you say this a lot, and as I'm listening to you, I'm remembering some of the key words that you use a lot, and one of them is it's not a gotcha. You say that a great deal. It's not a gotcha, but these goals lack aspiration. I said that initially, I'll say that today, and I'll say that tomorrow until they change. And obviously, that concerns me, because it's not a gotcha. I'm not going to hold my superintendent to these aspirational goals, but I would have liked them to be more aspirational in comparison of what we can achieve for our student success. But I will give you a positive and confirm this. This should outlive superintendents, right? So if Dr. Ball decided...
And board members.
And board members. And that's something that we've lacked in a sense of having a board 5-year goal, but that the new board would then adopt and continue to cultivate. And I see that as an enormous positive, because I think we've kind of missed those opportunities in the past. So I'll say at least that's good as we set that standard as we move forward. But those are my 2 thoughts.
Yeah, no, and that's a great point. And this is the other thing. When you get to a point where you, as board members, include this as part of your onboarding for any new board members, then then it becomes even more of a strong framework, right? Because what happens is, somebody might come in, you guys are all working on this framework, and then if another board member, you resign, and another board member comes in, and they're not familiar with this framework, then they could, there could be friction, there could be conflict, right? And so it's really your job as board members to include this kind of thing as part of your onboarding for your new board members. And that's why it's codified too, right? It's not so easy to change them and dismantle them if they're in policy. And so that's why we vote on them. That's why we vote on them. And
well, that only works if you have sustainability at the admin level and board level. And just for the sake of board consumption and discussion here today, we have a fraud and abuse hotline where administration went ahead and decided to eliminate the hotline, which was voted upon in a 2012 board meeting but no one remembered that we actually had taken action to vote on it. So it's important, too, that we understand that that possibility could exist. And I don't know what, but if it happens in an instant like that, it could happen with this, too.
Right. Well, it won't happen if you monitor, right? Because every board meeting will have a monitoring report, and that monitoring report should go in your board book. It will go in your minutes, right? Your community will see that. So that's transparency, right? The dialogue that you have around those progress measures will be open and will be transparent, and the goals will be posted where your community can see them and can see the progress reports. So there's a lot of transparency in this process too that I would hope allow things not to be forgotten, right? Now, and when I mentioned the onboarding part, that's kind of I think there's maybe 2 boards in Texas that are at that level where they can actually teach this to their new board members. But it's definitely an aspiration for board members, I think. Fort Worth just started it, and HEB has done it. Not the grocery store, but
Yeah.
Hughes
Bedford.
In North Texas, we know that, and so then we
Yeah.
come down here and we're
No,
like,
I-
HEB.
It took me a second, though. I really thought it was HEB corporate.
You what?
I really thought it was HEB corporate for a second.
Yeah, I forget that because, we don't get the
I mean, they're
beautiful
involved
HEB.
heavily in education, so they might
Makes
use the day.
They might. So, any other questions? These are really great questions about this framework, and I just wanted to tease out your memory of it, make sure we were reviewing it since we hadn't seen each other in a while. And so now let's just look at the progress measures and see where we are. But first, if you want, we can just make sure we're reminded of what a progress measure is. So it's a SMART deal. It has a baseline, a target, a population, and a deadline. And with these goals, you have asked your team to make sure that they have given you targets for every population. So you have that in this sheet here as well. And they're predictive of the goal, and they're influenceable by the superintendent. And I think that's an important thing. We don't want to set goals that are out of our superintendent's control. So you guys want to, I think we did this last time. I think you built one,
Yeah.
didn't you? So I won't make you build one again. But if you look in your book, in your binder, in the Lone Star Governance page on page 26, hopefully it's the right page. These page numbers change nonstop. Yeah, the progress and accountability. So the progress roles, if you look at that, the way that and this will be a part of the way you evaluate yourselves as well in this framework, is you have to have all of these kind of to get to the next one. And so as you move through this, you'll see that those goal progress measures are incredibly important as part of this. And how are you tracking your time talking about them? So I know I just gave you this, but there's a lot of really good stuff in here, and it's mostly what we've been talking about. So, and I showed you some samples before, so let's just go to this sheet here. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I think I have mine. Here, somewhere. I don't know what I did with mine, but I'll have it somewhere. So when we look at our progress measures on third grade literacy, and this is what your leadership team, and they've looked through their strategies, they've connected the work to what they were already measuring, because we don't want to build a lot of different measurements, right? But they also took in the things that were important to you that you mentioned in your last board meetings. And so for third grade for third grade reading, they're going to give you a first grade measurement. And once again, that has an annual target, so 31 to 37 in 22, so a 6-point growth this year, end of year. They're going to give you a second grade measurement, and these are on M-Class, which is your formative testing process, right? So they're measuring that. You know, teachers are constantly measuring and evaluating, and so you guys are going to get these goals. The goals are summative, but what you're going to get for progress measures are more formative assessments. So they're not just one day, one test, right? And then third grade students also on the M-Class, so then you would see progress even on your third grade goal in the year. So those are the 3 progress measures that your leadership team came up with. How are you guys feeling about those? Did those feel like they're predictive of the goal for you, and they're influenceable by the superintendent, meaning that she can deploy curriculum, resources, strategy, educators to move those? And then, as you can see, you have all the annual targets there. So right now, I believe you would have beginning of the year data, right? And do you have your middle of the year data? Okay, so those would be your progress report that you would get. And if we had started, September, we would have seen those as we're moving down. But starting once these are adopted, that's how that measurement will come.
And I think it was either 2 weeks ago or a week ago, I had shared some of the data on the Friday notes. I don't know if y'all remember, but I had shared on the with the campuses. I did specifically reading.
I'm going to ask a really geeky question.
Absolutely.
Okay, so this M-Class Amplify is new, right? Like from the state or?
Last year.
Yeah, okay. Have we seen yet if there's a correlation between kids hitting meets grade level on that assessment and meets grade level in STAR?
There's not a
Go right ahead. We're still transitioning.
Yeah.
There's not a direct correlation with STAR. There are some elements of it that is tied to what STAR is eventually going to test, because if you're looking at it in first, second grade, they're not tested on STAR.
Right,
Third
right.
grade is, and so we looked at different parts of it as far as the fluency and all of that, and looking at that and how that correlates to as a predictor of where a third grader may fall.
Okay.
If they're looking at beginning of the year, middle of the year. And so we're using it because we can tease it out, especially the reading one, you can tease it out at certain parts of it. So I can look at fluency, I can look at word recognition, I can look at vowel sounds, I can look at all these different things that kids who are struggling readers, this may tell us where we need to work with you specifically. So,
Got it.
I'm going to add to that.
I could,
Go right ahead.
actually.
Go right ahead.
Last year, because we were in virtual learning,
Right.
we didn't want to use the data of the students that took the test. A lot of them were taking them at home, and some of them weren't taking them because they were at home.
The M-Class or the?
The M-Class.
Yeah.
And then the STAR scores were so different.
Right.
So it would have not been a good study
Yeah.
to do.
Because mom might be sitting right
Yeah,
next
right
to them
there,
and
giving
giving them the answers.
Yeah. And we found that to be true in a lot of cases. Mom was literally on the screen.
Yeah.
But this year, it would be very good to see that. I will tell you, it is a good predictor of how the students are doing and grasping the reading concept.
Yeah.
So we do feel that it is a very strong correlation. I would not use the data from last year to prove that,
Yeah, that makes sense.
for those reasons.
I asked because already, our goal is meets grade level on the third grade STAR, moving from 31 to 45% in 5 years. But already our end of year goal for our current third graders is to move from 45 to 51% of them meeting grade level. And so that would already be 5% beyond the current goal. So that's why I'm at, but I understand they're not the same test at all. And that's what the data that we would have.
So where are we truly starting at? What What numbers are we starting at for now?
Or
What's presented on here?
is the 45 the beginning of year metric?
In real time, this is where we are.
Yeah,
Oh,
this is where we're starting.
So I just want to make sure I'm clear on that too. So your beginning of the year is 31% on GPM 1-1. Is that your BOY? And then,
Correct. Well, not for third grade, that's first grade.
first grade. I was looking at first grade.
Yeah.
I was going to get them up for all of them, yeah.
So first grade is 31.
Yep.
Third grade is 44.
And second grade is 42.
Correct.
And you have middle of year stat, and so do you have those in front of you, or?
I do. So first grade right now, middle of the year, we're at 38%.
Middle of the year, you're at 38%. You're-
And then for second grade, right now, we're at 45%.
Okay.
And then for third grade, we're at 46%.
Okay, so 38% for first grade and 46
For third.
for third and 45. So at first grade, you're already above your target.
Yes.
So, and I don't know if, does anybody, I know you've got some educators in the boardroom, but you also have folks like me who aren't educators. So I wonder if you could just explain maybe how this test is administered and how often do kids see it. Is that all right to do, just for the board?
wait, before we do
Oh,
that,
I'm sorry.
I have a quick question, I'm sorry. So in the book, right, the GPM here says the percentage of third graders, it's 45 to 51%, but the sheet is showing something totally different.
I think your very first page, ma'am, is your board goal, which is based on STAR.
What?
May I explain?
Oh, yeah.
So your very first sheet, ma'am,
There's the target
Third
measures
grade.
right behind
this
it.
is based on STAR reading. So all of these goals on the first page are based on STAR.
Okay.
The goal progress measures, which are the ones that we can adjust, these are based on a universal screener test called MCAP. And this is where first graders are at the beginning of
Oh,
the
so
year.
this matches that.
Correct. So you see first grade reading progress measure.
Okay.
These aren't based on STAR. These are based on a test they take 3 times a year for which you will receive data at the beginning of year, at the middle of year, and mid-year.
Ah, that's what you're talking about.
The beginning of the year was our baseline, so I shared that with you back in like October.
Right.
Dr. Duhart-Toppin will be sharing the middle of the year soon.
Okay.
In fact, some of it today.
Okay, thank you.
So,
Oh, sorry.
oh, go ahead. No, absolutely.
Well, I might be jumping ahead, so I'll let you explain the test first. Or whoever was going to explain.
Yeah, go ahead. Or did you already feel like you?
I'm always leaving it.
I know, because we're still
We're
working
transitioning.
together.
I got you. Okay, you're tag teaming. I got you.
And so, basically, what happens at the beginning, it's a universal screener that we give at the beginning of the year, and then we give it in the middle of the year and at the end of the year. And what the teacher does is prescribed tests that we give to the kids as a whole across grade levels. And what you want to do is measure certain parts of reading that kind of gives you, I had it in front of me, but a parts of reading that kind of indicates where the kid is as far as fluency, word recognition, vowel sounds, phonics, and decoding, and trying to figure out where the kids are. And so the teacher will give every kid the test, and then every kid is benchmarked where they are. And then we repeat it again in the spring for the middle of the year, around about January. And then from there, we want to see again where the kids are, and then you can prescribe down to the kid as far as Amplify has small group instruction. So if a kid is really struggling in an area, the teacher has a prescribed lesson to work with that student in a small group setting in the classroom. And then what you hope to see is that you see the kids start moving from where they are. So when we're tracking the data at the district level, we're looking at what we call the Amplify data, and we're looking at how many kids we have in red, how many kids we have in yellow, how many we have in green, and how many we have in blue. And what you want to do is see the number increase in the green and the blue, and decrease in the red and the yellow, because that means that kids are moving in the direction that we want them to. And it's specifically drilling down, because once you click on the data, you can click on a color, and it gives you those kids that are grouped in that color, in that group. And then basically, what do we need to do in order to move that kid from out of the red to the yellow, from the yellow to the blue? Because what you want to do is looking at growth per child.
And so the meets grade level bar changes throughout the year, correct? Right? Like a second grader is measured against the beginning of year second grader at the beginning of the year, then a middle of year, then it's not like STAR where it's like meets is
Correct.
just an end of year metric. It's a shifting one.
For the reading test.
Yes. Okay.
I will tell you, our math universal screener doesn't do that.
Okay.
Our math universal screener is more like, it's actually the reverse of STAR. The beginning of year test will measure against where they need to be at the end of the year.
Got it.
So
Okay.
it varies from screener to screener, and understanding how the screeners work is important.
And so on our first grade reading progress, if we had 31% meeting the beginning of year first year bar, or first grade bar, and now we have 38%, that means that like those 31 that were here progressed to where they needed to be, and an additional 7% moved up to meeting the expectation. Okay.
That is correct.
And so what this demonstrates, and what it does, is it's connected your board goals all the way down to a student, to the classroom. This is vertical alignment, which is what we have not seen very often in school districts, right? The board is kind of over here, and the district's kind of doing over here, and who knows what's being held, there's no meeting of the minds there, right? And so this connects what you wanted as board goals all the way down to the classroom and to the student. And that way you can connect all of the things that you as a board talk about to that vertical alignment. Like, how do we need to move these children if, our children, if we're not on progress, then we have that conversation. Now, with you guys, what you're seeing, if this were a progress report.
Can I ask
Yes,
for clarification?
certainly.
Because I need for Ceci to truly remind me. Ceci, could you remind me, because I thought this was required from the state and we had already said this prior to this, right?
Correct. 2 years ago, when House Bill 3 came on, we were required to create a long range, so early childhood long range plan, and that includes all of EC grades. So kinder, first, second grade. Ms. Canoyer served as the board member representing you all within that committee, along with other members of the district, and we were required to submit that plan to the state. That included goals.
And so it did go to the board. I'd have to look up exactly.
We did go to it was under an action item that went to the board.
So there's a little bit of a disconnect. It is the TEA, and so there's a disconnect between what was being pushed out for HB3 for the districts and what was being asked of boards. And, in my humble opinion, it was in reverse. Boards need to set the goals, and then the district comes under those goals and builds out the targets and the strategies underneath those. So it was a little bit of a,
Cattywampus.
right. But that's why we went back with you guys and said, okay, these are the goals. These are the 3 goals that you have to set that are required of the board as by HB3. What are those? And then the leadership team came back and said, okay, we've also been setting these goals. Now, can we find some common grounds where you guys said, okay, well, maybe this needs to be higher, and so we ooched them up, right? And so there was a lot of that. So that's what that beginning process was, is to create the alignment. It's not to say I didn't mean, and I hope I didn't, this wasn't what I was trying to intend to say was not that the district wasn't already doing this kind of work, it's that we hadn't created the alignment from the board all the way down to the classroom, and that's what really needs. Because otherwise, they're doing the work, but maybe you guys are resourcing something completely different because you're not on common ground. Does that make sense? So if this were a progress report, which you would have gotten for the middle of the year on this particular goal, you would have seen these 3 progress measures, and you would have seen that the first grade one exceeds, so you would have a green light on that. You would see that the second grade is what I would say is on target because it's beyond midpoint. So I would say that would be, depending on who scores, that would either be a yellow or green. I would make it a green because they're on progress, on target. And the third grade one, I would say is probably at least a yellow. Or that one you might want to have some conversation about because haven't really moved to the midpoint in that annual goal target. Does that make sense? So that's kind of how these frame your conversation when you get your progress report. So, okay, we don't need to talk about first grade. We're doing great. They are blowing it out of the water. They probably had a really great kindergarten program and a pre-K program that's all showing up, and maybe those kids haven't quite got to second and third grade yet, right? But they're deploying strategies in second grade. They're on target. Third grade, once again, when you deploy those at the early grades, it takes a little time before those kiddos get into that third grade. And so but those would be the questions that you would ask is, we're not on target here in third grade. So are we going to be on target for our annual STAR target on third grade? What do we need to do? Is there anything you're doing? And that would be where the dialogue would happen. Does that make sense? And it may be that you might answer that. Like, how would you guys answer that question?
What was the question?
The question was, you're not quite on progress for the third grade M-Class Amplify goal. So the question that the board might ask is, can you explain that? What is happening there?
I can tell you, we just had this conversation about 3 weeks ago with Jennifer Johnson, who works really closely with our early literacy, and we were seeing a pattern at third grade reading. And so what the conversation was, bring all the literacy instructional specialists back in and look at the data again and revamp or go back in and kind of tweak the scope and sequence to go back and hit some of the skills that we saw weakness in when we pulled the middle of the year data. And so we released that to the campuses last week, and she has been going and working specifically with third grade teachers about what we need to do differently in our instructional plan in order to meet where the data is telling us. So that was releasing a new scope and sequence with specific lessons that go with that to target those areas that have shown that we're not moving in the direction that we want them to go.
So now they have the new scope and sequence?
Yes.
And was that pretty much across the board? You were seeing those?
We looked at data from the bird's eye view from the district level, but also very specific campuses too.
Yes, you had a question.
When I first came on board, one of the things that I saw is exactly what is reflected here in these numbers, and that I couldn't understand then, is that the kids, how is it that, they're in kindergarten, first grade, and I say kindergarten because I know some kindergartners that can read, and they're at and above grade level, but by the time they're third, fourth grade, they're struggling. What happens between then and there that slows the learning, hampers the learning? What's happening that's not challenging them to stay up there? I don't understand why they're in 5th and 6th grade and they're reading on 3rd and 4th grade level. I don't get that.
Well, I think, if I might, I think what you're asking if we were to relate it to these progress measures, which I think is an excellent question, is, what is the reason that our first graders are hitting, our second graders are hitting, and our third grades aren't?
Yeah.
And so I would ask that question, was there something deployed that hadn't quite got to third grade kids yet, right? So
Our pre-K program was recently deployed. If you recall, 3 years ago, we made
The what program?
the pre-K program 3 years ago became pre-K all day, right? So now those students are matriculating up. We've added pre-K 3, so those students would now actually be in first and second grade. So you can see the matriculation of the students going up. Also, 2 years ago, we started emphasizing in this district the science of reading, which begins mostly at the first and second grade. So although we actually put out the Texas Reading Academy to third grade teachers, our Director of Early Literacy focused on revamping all of the kinder, first, and second grade curriculum, which we're now seeing the effects of the implementation and instruction. So the focus now is going to be to revamp the curriculum for third, fourth, and fifth grade. Because what happens as students matriculate, those gaps, if not filled in that year, only become bigger and bigger and bigger. So by the time they're in fifth grade, a fifth grade teacher may not have the knowledge, not through their fault, but because when they're in the university does not teach a fifth grade teacher how to close a gap and how to teach a struggling reader. That's a skill that has been left to kinder, first, and second grade teachers. That's why TEA is now going back and saying, wait a minute, we need to make sure that all K through sixth grade teachers now have that science of reading attachment, endorsement on their certificate, because in the past, third through fifth grade readers, you receive a struggling reader, well, teaching phonics is not my strength, because that's not what
What
I
are we
did.
doing as a district?
We're that's what we're doing. So we're emphasizing all of the science of reading, academy learning. We are revising third, fourth, and fifth grade curriculum so that teachers, and we're building up their knowledge so that teachers know how to take a struggling fourth grade reader and know exactly how to bring them up in progress.
Are those students receiving any extra help, any
Absolutely.
tutoring, RTI?
Intervention.
Yes. And recently too,
I'm sorry.
wait, just because we're still transitioning. And recently too, last year, we started focusing on, if you remember, there's been quite a bit of change in the RTI process.
Every year.
Yes. But every year, for the last several years, it's gotten a little bit better. Last year, the year before, we changed the structure, right? We had all of this RTI. So then last year, we focused on implementing across the board a consistent RTI program. Because before, everybody had a different one.
They
Whatever
sure did.
we went to a convention, hey, this sounds good. But we have to have that consistency so that the resources, the few resources that we have up in central office, we know exactly what kind of training to give out. So last year we switched all elementary K through 5 to Aspire, which is a phonics-based science of reading program that implements what we're learning from TEA, that focuses on only closing gaps.
You know, it's funny you say that about the phonics. That's the basics of reading that we took out of reading.
Yes.
And I
Years
never
ago, the
understood where they
pendulum
did it.
goes like that.
Yes,
Yes. And
Good
we're,
teachers never took it out.
yes,
But you see, one of the biggest resources that our district got, honestly, was in the personnel of Ms. Johnson.
Absolutely.
I hear over and over from teachers and from principals how she goes in there and models lessons, attends their PLCs. That was something, she's still, this is her third year in the district?
Yeah.
So this is her third year in the district. And she really is phenomenal in regards to her grasp of how to teach teachers how to teach reading.
Teach the teachers.
Yeah.
And
And you're seeing the effects.
Is she?
I don't know.
I don't think she
No.
did.
Sounds like it.
No.
And the other thing is, the reading academies is something that the state implemented, but she takes it a step further to make sure that the teachers are truly implementing what they're learning in the reading academies, and not just checking it off and saying, yes, I did it.
So when did that become a requirement?
The reading academies?
Yeah.
Last year, and we implemented it here to all third grade teachers and RTI teachers. So we developed a plan, and then this year it's currently being implemented with and all principals.
Did you have a fiscal
Because it's a requirement. This year we're with second grade teachers, special education teachers, and so each year we're going to matriculate. And it's already in the works that all the way down, it's already in the works that it's also going to move 4th, 5th, and 6th grade up, that the state will.
Is it something that has to be renewed on a yearly basis, or just,
So far, it's only a one-time.
time?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's like getting a master's, I will say.
Very intensive.
Extremely
Lots of work.
intensive, But now it's our responsibility. So everything that we're doing needs to resemble that. It's our responsibility to continue with the training, with our teachers, monitoring, implementing, co-teaching, curriculum-wise, and all
And the
sorts
principal
of
has to do it too.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
And I think that new teachers now, when they get their certification, well, I know, they have to take an exam called the Science of Teaching Reading, and they're required to take a course that prepares them for the exam, and that's K through 8. So you have a reading subject on your certificate, like you're a generalist, you have to take the Science of Teaching Reading. And I'm assuming that the modules that are in the prep course are similar to the reading academy, so that you can expect that new teachers coming in will have that training.
That is correct.
And so you probably, this is great questions, all on topic, all around a student outcome goal, and you probably saw a fiscal note around this in your last budget, and you'll probably see another one, correct me if I'm wrong, in your next budget.
So what the board approved back in the fall is for us to give that $500 stipend to the teachers that had already completed the training from last year, and then once these teachers for this year complete the training, they will get their stipend.
And so you see how that, now, what you resourced is actually being demonstrated and how it affects children, directly through this goal. And that is something that, we hadn't been doing through our boards. We haven't been talking about that. So that to me is making the connections that is going to make us intentional about helping to move the needle forward for kids. Make sense? Any other questions about this GPM? Great dialogue, great questions. Thank you for explaining that. I think you did an excellent job. I needed to hear that M-class amplify definition as well, so I appreciate that. Thank you. Any other questions on that one? Because we'll move to our math one and take a look at those. So the third grade once again, third grade math meets level on STAR, 21 to 42%. There's a first grade, a second grade, and a third grade. And this is on the Imagine Math indicator, predictor. And you can see what this movement is. So maybe you guys could give a little bit of background on the Imagine Math and how that is a predictor of the STAR goal.
I'm going to say, I'm going to have to beg for forgiveness. That is the one that is, the data is wonky, and I'm trying to get it where I can pull it and give you, it's by each campus, and it's not capturing it by, for reading, because Amplify, the way it reports it out, I can get a report that's by grade level, and I can split that out and look at all my reds and greens. Our math one is not like that. So.
No, it doesn't. So it does not provide
It
the
doesn't
data the
provide
same
it
way
like
that
this.
M-Class Amplify does. So that could be something that the board could consider resourcing, such as math. So we are looking at different universal screeners that could be more predictive of STAR, specifically for math. And it just doesn't produce the data like this, so it takes a lot longer. So we ask our specialists then to take the data that it spits out and turn it into this. So it's not there yet, but it will be. And you will have the report that Dr. Toppin will share with you soon for math. That is also the one where the universal screener is a bit reversed. It shows the students very, very low performing at the beginning of the year, because it's not testing them at the beginning of the year growth. It's testing them at what they should know by the end of the year, which is
So
not
you'd have to look
typical
at
of
the
a
previous year's
Year.
data at the end of year
Right.
to see.
End of year to beginning of
And if you
year.
get out something like this, because I was trying to maneuver it and whatnot, and so you can see it's like, it's not friendly at all. And so it does take a little bit longer to.
So we are looking at something different for next year, so that, you know, as Dr. Toppin continues to work with curriculum and as we're working with school improvement, that is something that we can have to be able to produce.
It's hard to find a really good universal screener,
It is.
because we not only have to have it for English, we have to have it in Spanish.
Oh, yeah.
And it's really hard to find a good one.
Yes, every so many years, the state then comes up with a different one. You might recall that many years ago, it was Imagine Math. It no longer is. It's now changed to Imagine Learning, and it now looks very different, and so the state has moved away from that. MAP is one that they endorse.
And MAP is
And math
Well
includes
known.
reading
well-known and is a good
math
predictor.
and-
Yeah,
It is a very, that
Yeah.
one is a predictor.
right.
It also includes science, if you want to
It
throw
does,
it
for
in there.
certain grade levels, yes.
And some of the teachers also prefer one that also has some support that goes with it.
Correct, yes. So I will tell you, everybody loves Amplify, we're doing good with that, but I know that for math, we are seeking a different resource so that we'll be able to follow data a bit more.
When do you expect to be able to decide and then implement a new provider?
We'll have one for the beginning of next school year. We're already in conversations with them, and we're actually meeting with them at the end of this month.
And so when will you have, do you have end-of-year data on the Imagine Math from last year?
For last year,
You don't have to give it to me.
right
You-
now.
No, not right now, but I mean, in your report, since this is kind of a wonkier one, that might be a good, might help the board understand the movement if they saw end of year last year, beginning of year, and middle of the year.
But again, we have to be careful, because we were so virtual last year. Is it truly valid data?
Right.
So,
Judson was very heavy virtual.
Yeah.
And if we could,
But we also,
What was that?
What was your
I
question?
said maybe go 2 years back. So the last year
we didn't do,
had-
we were out of school,
Yeah.
that, we
we
went,
didn't have end-of-year data.
So the last year that we had.
That would be 3 years ago.
That would have been 3 years ago.
3 years ago?
yeah,
Yeah.
and I don't
That
think
might be
that's
a little
comparable.
Too old,
Too far back,
because those kids are in high school now.
Well, middle school.
yeah, it might be a little too far back.
And this is another kind of thing that is bubbling up too, is this year is it's a better year, right? It's a little bit more certain, but we're still not
Yeah.
positive what's happening. So this might be, to your point, is that, you know, when you look at those end of year numbers, those annual targets, you'll have a better idea maybe, like, okay, do we need to move anything? Do we need to make adjustments now that we've had kind of almost a full year, right? And so then moving forward. But so this is a little bit of I think we want to say it's a catch-up year, but I don't know if it's a full catch-up year, right? So it's I think that's important to think about as you're looking at these numbers moving forward too.
and I
At the
will
end
say
of
that
the
we
year.
will have some concrete data by the end of this week, because we do have our mock star going on this week, and all of our tested grade levels, so we'll be able to get kind of where the kids are, especially in math.
And does the board see that information? Does
Yeah.
the board see that information? So we'll see it in the March meeting, I guess?
Yes.
Our Friday notes?
And those can be also be added to your board monitoring reports. So, and we can, I can give you formats, but you can do it however you want. Okay, any questions on the math one? That's good dialogue. All right, the 7th grade math one, once again. And this is one that I think y'all had some concern with. but it's also the Imagine Math. So would this one go to MAP as well if you were to?
Yes.
Okay. So this one has 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And so I want you, this one I had a question about, and I wondered if the board had any questions about this, these GPMs, as predictors of 7th grade STAR in math.
And these goals were, again, be consistent, which is what we had in the beginning, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. This is the only one that includes approaches as well as meets grade level in its assessment.
It is an approaches goal.
But I think for the sake of data, it includes both of those segments, full meets grade level and approaches in the percentage?
Not
Or is it
this
just
one.
approaches?
Approaches and above, just like the other one was meets and above. I think my question that I had was just if you would explain the 8th grade, the 8th grade GPM for a 7th grade indicator.
Is that the algebra one?
I know you had a reason for it, I just couldn't recall, and I thought maybe the board would
Why to
want
include the 8th grade in, since
Yeah.
we're measuring 7th grade?
Great.
Yeah, I thought it had to do with the algebra, but I wanted Ceci to remind.
Well, the 8th grade progress measure is consistent as we also continue with CCMR. So when you're also talking about algebra, and when you're talking about all of those, I mean, there are a total of 4 goals. So maybe it might not go there, but it's also important when you're thinking of the overall curriculum for middle school math. We want our 7th grade to improve. By improving our 7th grade, we're also improving our 8th grade accountability. And in 8th grade, we also test algebra, which also then affects our high school.
Do you think that an 8th grade indicator is a college readiness indicator then?
Not in itself,
Okay.
not in itself.
If I remember correctly, we wanted an 8th grade math goal to start with, and then when we started looking at pulling out the students that test for Algebra 1, and trying to figure out how we could account for the 2 different scores at 8th grade, and that's why we moved it back to 7th grade. So, okay, let's focus in on 7th grade, because if they're on target in 7th grade, we can hope that they would still continue to be on target in 8th grade.
Absolutely right.
Right.
And also recall that we talked a little bit, I mean, we didn't go into a root
Right.
analysis as a board, but we talked a little bit about why 7th grade was performing lower. So 7th grade students who are on the AP, pre-AP track are taking the 8th grade STAR.
Right.
8th grade students who are, so your 7th grade overall, when you look at 6th, 7th, and 8th, looks a lot lower, because your 8th grade students who are mostly considered to be on level or advanced are not
Taking
here. So your 7th grade STAR looks a lot lower.
Say that again.
So students who enter 6th grade can choose to go pre-AP math, well, it's now called honors math versus on-level math. And so they take a compacted 6th and 7th grade curriculum, then they move to 7th grade, they take a compacted 7th and 8th grade curriculum. So those students are out of the testing of 7th grade. And so only the kids who are on level, not the students who are considered honors,
Right.
they're not
They're not
reflected in your
taking the
7th
test.
grade math
So
test.
it's not reflected in this percentage.
It's not reflecting the entire 7th grade population. It's only reflecting the population that is not in honors,
Okay.
which would explain why it's lower than, you
Right.
see a dip.
So they're going to, we started teaching the Algebra 1, parts of Algebra 1 in the 7th grade now?
At the end of the year, as just for those who are in honors courses.
Only in the honors?
Yes, and then once they get to 8th grade, that's all they take is Algebra 1. And so then your 8th grade score for math is reflecting 8th grade students only.
Who are on level for just 8th grade math.
Yes, because then you have your Algebra 1 students taking the Algebra 1 screener.
Oh, okay. That's two, yeah, that's the two different grades you're talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But that generally is a small part, right? We're not dealing with a lot
It's
of
kind
folks.
of a lot bigger.
Well, I know that I toured Justin Middle and was reminded of the JSTEM program there, and I suspect a lot of those JSTEM students are not testing because they're going to be testing at that higher level. What would you, I mean, I would see then Justin Middle School being impacted, but overall, with all our middle schools, Kirby, Metzger, Woodlake,
They all offer about 2 classes of Algebra 1 for every 8th
so
grade
what would you
course.
say in terms of percentage? I'm thinking small, 10, 15%. Would you say it's much higher?
I wouldn't know,
I don't wanna-
guess.
I don't want to say.
But I can make a.
We can
Just
get
for
that for you.
perspective, I mean, we want our students to excel, but obviously that plays into the 7th grade data that's not accurately reflecting where all our students are who are actually 7th graders. So either we have them take this test twice, I don't know what else, but we need to.
Well, that's why we made it the approaches
I would hope it's a lot more
goal.
than 10%.
I
So
think
it's
higher than
because
that.
in order to,
It's more
in
like
order to be
25,
on
20, 25.
college-bound math track,
Yeah, it
you
has to
need
be.
to take algebra in 8th grade.
Yes.
And so I would hope that more than 10% of our 8th graders
Well, and
are.
that's why if we can identify what that
We
percentage
can get
is.
that for you.
For me, I mean, that obviously just shows again another growth pattern, that 25 or 35% of our students are on that track, which then deducts from 7th grade, but we know that 35% of them are already automatically above.
That can certainly be something to like to Dr. Ball.
That would, yeah, I think that would help explain a little bit more to these GPMs, to know those differences, so that's good. Okay, and then the last one, any other questions on that one? Those look like predictors that you feel comfortable with? You'll see data. Okay, you may see a different data set if MAP comes in for next year. Okay, then,
And let me just say this real quick. I know that we've talked a lot about 7th grade math that meets that grade level and approaches. A lot of my concern is just that competitively, Region 20 and the state averages were higher. So if we're having more students, maybe that's the point we focus in on, but it would be good to see what that looks like even in other districts, how many more of their students are testing, just so we have an accurate picture. Apparently, that skews things, but I just wanted to put, if you're going to get that information, something to compare it to. Yeah, 30% of our students take it, but what does it look like in other districts? Because we're at 19% in 2019 as opposed to 38, 43% with the state in Region 20. That's just such an enormous difference.
yeah, and I think you can also, that may be something that you schedule into your board work at the end of the year is kind of a peer analysis, so that you have that as well in your data and just looking at data. Just as long as you,
When you say peer analysis, like a market analysis, like of other,
like, who are your peer districts? I mean, I think it's important that it isn't, I know you have competitors, but they may have a very different demographic, they have a very different, so, you can build peer data sets where you actually have the same, right? And I'm sure you've looked at those. So that could be part of your data analysis at the end of the year as a board, and I think that's something that you guys did when you set these goals. You looked at all that data and you looked at that peer analysis. But I think it's important to remember too that you're measuring, you're trying to measure and set goals for your own district so that your own superintendent and her team can move forward based on those numbers. So then the last goal is the Ccmr goal, and you have, and this is really a CCR goal, I imagine, more than a CCMR goal, but will increase from 50% to 68% in 5 years. And the GPM that you have on here is the TSI criteria, which I think I even have a slide on this. Does the board understand how TSI correlates with this goal? Or do you need more detail on that?
More detail.
More detail.
Yeah.
The TCSI,
TSI.
TSI, oh my God,
What is
I'm sorry.
the
The
TSI?
TSI is the Texas Success Initiative that measures whether or not a child is ready for college ready.
Right.
And so the kids take an exam that measures where they are in reading and math, and then the schools, universities, or the junior colleges have a score that they have to be in order to meet. And if they meet that score, then they don't have to do what we call remedial classes. They'll go to college, and if you haven't met that college readiness level, you have to take like an entry course that you don't get credit for, but you still have to pay for, in order to continue to even start taking your college courses. And so the goal is that when we graduate kids from Judson ISD, that we are graduating kids that have met that TSI readiness standard, so that when they do whatever they decide to do, whether it's junior college, university, that they're at that level and that they're ready to take on-level courses when they get to the college level. And so TSI is where we're putting, because it's also your TSI, it's also your ACT, SAT, it's your military, until military, you're like up in limbo right now. So when we stood back and looked at all the criteria that's connected to the Ccmr, where can we get the most bang for our buck? Where can we push for our kids to not only affect our accountability, but where do we want our kids to leave us ready? And TSI, we can start that in 9th grade, and we do. We started in 9th grade. Actually, we started in middle school, getting them in that summer bridge coming into 9th grade. And so we start testing kids, and so they meet the criteria. It sets the kids on the path for success for a dual credit. It sets them on the path for success for Alamo College Academy. Those are different things that we offer. And so we can test kids over and over again until they meet that criteria. But one of the other things that we do is make sure that there is a way that we're tracking kids. So if you take the TSI and you score here, we're going to give you remediation here, and then we're going to test you again. So kids are not just taking the test over and over again and failing over and over again. It's kind of building that remediation in there for student success. So TSI is to measure if every child is ready for college when they leave Judson ISD. And so you bump your TSI number, you bump your overall Ccmr score, and you bump your overall accountability.
Mary, will you talk a little bit about what changed in regards to the military readiness and intent?
Yes.
Recently changed. Well, not recently, but that changed.
So when the state came out with Ccmr, military was frozen. So if a kid said that they were going to enlist in the military, we got a point for that. So the military and TEA couldn't agree on how that was going to be calculated. So either the child enlisted and we could count the child that way, or the child went through our recruiter and they enlisted that way, we can count the child that way. So because the military wasn't willing to share data with TEA, we're now in limbo for the military component of college for Ccmr.
So it should just be called CCR.
That's where we are right now. And so until they figure out how they're going to allow this to be, we are not getting any credit right now for students that want to go into the military.
But that's across the board.
Which is quite a bit.
Right, everyone, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And I've been checking it religiously, Ceci and I both, because it does impact our overall accountability.
How much of our score was dependent on that?
I hope not.
The military part or the CCMR part?
How much of the military part
Of the Ccmr?
do we rely on for the full season?
How much did that help us?
What's that?
How much did it help us?
A lot.
It's one of 9 criteria buckets or components.
But it was
That
one that we
percentage-wise.
could count on, along with our CTE and our
And I think
TSI.
particularly in that 50% of kids that is not, not taking college readiness exams, that's not getting the industry certificates, like, because they're like, I'm going into the military, that's my career path. So they might not be in high school doing the other things that get us the point for.
But the problem was that we were just taking their word for it, right? Or like,
No.
No.
I think we were tracking it, but I
But
think some
TEA
districts were saying like, oh,
Yeah.
they're military
Yeah.
ready, they
That's why they
could go
changed.
into.
Right.
They
that's why
talked
changed,
about
yeah.
going into the military.
but it
They
wasn't
were getting
confirmed.
it.
That's why the change.
If they went for a meeting with a recruiter, they counted it, whether
Yeah.
they enlisted or not.
Yeah.
If they, indicated on a piece of
I
paper
think sometimes
they were going to do
like,
it, they
took
counted
the
it.
ASVAB. And
Yes.
it's just like, give the
Yes.
ASVAB to every kid in the.
Yes.
Submitted.
Some districts do
District
that.
practices is what changed.
And there are some districts that literally 80% of their CCMR was military. And so it became,
Yeah.
When people mess up, we all get punished.
right. So I think that's a good point. I think you were talking about this, Dr. Ball, is how much of that 50% number includes a military number that you're not going to be able to demonstrate and include in your annual target?
So your CCMR overall of your overall percentage is 40% of your overall accountability. So that chunk is kind of bundled with your star performance, your graduation rate, and your CCMR. So what we've done, okay, the military, we're still
Can't
in
count on
limbo.
this year.
Can't count on it. So where can we get the most bang for our buck? So Mr. Holmes, with the very beginning of this year, we started meeting with high schools and basically saying, we need to know who on your campus does not have a check mark next to their name for CCMR. So here's your list of high school seniors.
Get them a check.
Which ones don't have a check mark, whether that check mark be for AP exams, IB exams, every kid has to have a check mark. So if they didn't have a check mark, it became a concentrated effort to make sure that if it was just TSI, we got you checked off for that. So 100% of our kids can graduate CCMR. Check.
So just taking the assessment though gives them a check mark?
No.
Passing it at a level.
Passing it at a certain,
Passing,
yes.
passing it with a certain rate. So under all of the components of CCMR, and
TSI is
yes, this one is the one that we can affect this year. Because I heard you say it sounds a little light. Out of all of the components, some of those components we can't affect this year.
No.
They're set because they are from previous years. So in order for us to be able to show you progress for this year, this is the one that we can show you progress in. And that's why it is light. But the other components, if you remember that section when Dr. Toppin talked to you about the taper report, some of that section is set from 2 years ago.
Right.
So this is a section that we can show you progress now.
Yeah.
So we considered all those things as we were trying to identify what were the best type of goal progress measures we can bring forward.
And are the counselors going through the 9th, 10th, and 11th graders to see if they're on track to get, like, oh, this kid is taking AP courses, this kid is in a CTE sequence?
They have a spreadsheet
Mm-hmm.
and it's tracking from the time they enter in as their freshman. Some of them is tracking from the time they started
Eighth
taking
grade.
college, high school level courses in middle school.
Yeah.
So you're checking from there.
Would you, so is the board okay with this single progress indicator? Or do you want to see anything in 9th, 10th, or 10th, 11th, or AP classes, or any of that? Is that something that, those are typical progress measures that I've seen around this goal. I think this is a strong predictor, but it's up to you guys.
If you all have the data for 9th, 10th, and 11th, and I don't know that we would necessarily need to here's the goal from beginning of end of year, but it would be helpful to get a baseline of how many students in each grade in high school are
Have the check
on
mark?
track. Yeah, have the check mark already, or or highly, they're taking honors, so they'll take AP next year or something. But
Gives us, I think, a perspective as to how much work there is to do
Yeah.
then when they get to be seniors.
Yeah.
The
Because
only-
by then it's almost too late, you know, then the only thing you can do is the TSI.
Right.
Yeah.
And I realize you would only have a baseline right now, so you wouldn't really be able to indicate progress until the next year.
Yeah.
I would say the only thing that I'll look up or would like to know again is what we look like comparatively, you know, and with other districts, it's hard to look just at us and say, okay, we're meeting the needs in the community without seeing what's around us. And that's all I would like to know. That way then I could firm up and say, okay, these targets are good, or bad, or whatnot, but just need to have that perspective.
Okay. All right, so those are the progress measures. Those are the GPMs. Great work, team.
Thank you.
You guys all feel good? Oh, question?
Yeah, we also invest in SATs. I don't know if we talked about ACTs. We're still doing the SAT. Our percentage of students are in the 90 percentile that take the exam. Why couldn't we use that as another measurement of how well our students are performing? Is that too crazy to use? Because if we're expending the funds to allow students, that's beneficial, but we also need to measure if we're spending money wisely or if the kids aren't taking SAT seriously. But
Jose, I think the thing I would say there is that like a lot of the kids on this particular measure, on the CCMR one, most of the kids because to get the point from the SAT, you have to hit also a certain cut score, and those kids are probably already getting the point for taking AP classes and things like that. And our ability to get a kid who is not getting a CCMR point yet to the point where they need to on SAT versus TSI is a much bigger hill to climb. So it's not like we're spending money. We should be spending money on universally giving the SAT because we're probably finding some kids that like would not be getting that otherwise. But for the purposes of this, it's probably not going to help us, if that makes sense.
it does, but it's still just another assessment. I mean, it's being monitored by the state, by P16 Council. I think it's a different, I forget the name of the council now, they changed their name. But it's something that is just part of the evaluation of districts, and they rate all districts based on SAT scores.
And it is part of the bundle for CCMR. It's part of one of the 9-10 indicators that are there, or 9 now because we can't do military, but, and we do have some kids will not meet the cut on SAT, but will meet the TSI. So that is why the push is, yes, we're going to test every junior, yes, we're going to test every senior, but we're also going to test for TSI also. So if you don't meet the cut over here, then at least we're still getting you the college-ready criteria on the TSI.
But we can still report on the other ones, on the other domains in CCMR?
Absolutely.
Yes. Everything's in your TPR report. So there.
Now, I could be wrong in remembering this, so y'all would have to correct me, but I thought that, because there's a lot of things that we could measure, a lot of things. I thought that we had agreed to stay within the 4, but of course, if the board wants to add more, we can. But wasn't that one of the very initial discussions that we had at the very beginning, saying, let's focus on 1 to 3 or 1 to 4 things and make sure we got the right? Is that right? Or
Yeah, it's no more than 5 goals. And, you know, I think what the CCMR indicators could be, and you usually never have more than 3 progress measures. So those could be 2 additional progress measures under the CCMR goal. So you wouldn't have another board goal. What you would have is like the SAT data, or you know, you could have, if the board wanted that. They don't have to have more progress measures, but so it wouldn't be additional goals. Yeah, because you're right. We don't want to have a whole list of goals because we know that then, you know,
Nothing's
it's too
a
much to
priority.
track. And right, you're focused on, and what you guys came up with these are really important goals that we need to hit for our kids to have a pathway to post-secondary success. And so,
And regardless, either one of those components within CCMR which obviously we are tracking all of them, will yield the percentage increase from 50 to 68%. Because at the end of the day, we need to ensure, each high school ensures that every student falls within one of those, I call them buckets, indicators, but to ensure that we reach that Ccmr goal. But that would be one of them, yes. That or another. So it's not all of them that they need to get. It's one out of all of the indicators gives them the point.
In my assessment, we're always looking for a niche to say we're better or better than other choices. And focusing on something like the SAT would be one of those things I think the general community would understand. Well, people who go to Judson, they're going to score better. It's that kind of thing that we start to evaluate, which if we're not looking at it, I know you guys are, but we need to look at it. It would be good just to have another assessment on it, just in my opinion, so that we know it's going up, even though 90% of our students are coming out. And I remember when Nancy Robinson was here, she was happy to do it, but I remember her point was, once 90% of the students are doing it, your averages are going to fall like this. And we, as a board at the time, we expected that. That was okay. But over some time, we expect that to decline. And so it would be interesting to see, since we've done it since 2010, where it's ended up.
And we're happy to do it too, Mr. Rossi.
Yeah.
So all I would need is, if the board is consensus on that, we'd be happy to provide any data.
It had gone up in the last couple of years before COVID, and then I
Who
don't know
knows?
what it was, but
Well, because remember there was
yeah.
the year that they didn't even have to take it.
Right.
Was it yeah.
This
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, that is, that day, yeah, so that's the reason, again, we chose this one specifically because
It's year to
all the
year.
other indicators lag a year behind. So we wouldn't be able to show you necessarily the progress at the end of this year.
Right, on
And
SAT.
we would be, just know that it wouldn't, to me, I understood that the goal progress measures had to be for this year, not.
Just predictive of the goal. So if you had a, if you had a, like even a pre-SAT or, in a PSAT, it's not a pre-S. Those type of scores could be a predictor of college readiness under this. So, and most of the Ccmr I get are not going to be like beginning of the year, middle of the year, end of the year, right? They're all going to be kind of one single, but if you wanted to add a progress measure that is an SAT measurement, you could, but that's going to be, very similar to what you already have. So my recommendation, if you wanted to see a predictor, would be to take an earlier grade predictor to see if, we're making sure our 10th graders, like you were saying, are our 9th and 10th and 11th graders getting what they need so that when they do take the TSI, they're ready for it, or they're coming out college readiness. So, those are your options.
And that's
really,
kind of
for-
more narrative data, right? Rather than setting a goal. Because some of that you can't, I don't know how you set GPM goals for that.
Well,
kind of
they're
stuff,
kind of
right?
end of year GPMs, but they could be like,
Yeah.
how many students enroll in dual credit? How many students are taking AP exams? How many,
So that
what is
could
the
be
percentage?
supporting data.
It's just
Right.
data, it's not a goal progress.
Right.
measure.
Right.
So you would just specifically be asking for data that's not a formative piece of data that we could provide to you at beginning, middle, and end of year,
Right.
but it is certainly data that we have.
Right.
That could be provided.
It would be predictive of the overall CCMR goal
For
the
students-
5-year goal.
For the students within the
Right.
cohort, right? So once those students end up in their senior cohort, that would
Right.
be indicative of that. But just know that you're not measuring them in real time. The other piece is, the reason that CCMR counts as much as it does, and why the state allows all those indicators, is that the state understands that not all students are going to college. Not all students are going to have a career. Others will take college. Then, you break down your students. Some will go to career, some will have a college career, some are going to go to military. So even though we want to push SAT, and we just actually had an SAT prep last weekend for students, we also know that the SAT won't necessarily serve a student who's going to be entering the military or serve a student who's going to be entering a technical college per se. So the indicators vary.
Right. And so this is where you could also have a CTE kind of indicator in here as well.
But just as a side note, some of the courses that we have to take in the military, they ask you for your SAT scores. And a lot of us take college courses while we're deployed. And when you go to register for those courses, you need your SATs and your ACTs.
Yeah.
So even those that are going in the military, they need to take the test so that it's on record.
Yeah. And to your point too, it's aspirational for your kids all to be college ready, regardless of what they choose, right? It should be their choice.
I won't even have to say it, you said it for me, it's exactly what I was going to say.
Okay, so we've got any more questions on the GPMs? If not, let's take a short break. We've been talking for almost 2 hours. Sorry. So let's take a short break, like 10 minutes,
Okay.
and then we'll move on. Does that sound okay?
Yep.
You have to tell people? Great dialogue, great discussion.
Okay, we're going to take a 10-minute break. The time now is 7:49, and we'll return at 8 o'clock.
Would you like another water?
I'll get up and get it myself.
Want some more water?
Support improving student outcomes. So which two things did we talk about?
Goal setting,
Setting goals
monitoring goals.
and monitoring progress.
Right.
Exactly. So those are the two. And then the third one is kind of that value space, right? And those are called constraints, non-negotiables, and there really are two different types. There's those that the board implements on themselves, and there's those that are a part of the superintendent constraints. Boards do not have progress measure, board constraints, but superintendent constraints do have progress measures. And so you think about it kind of in line of like an analogy, like an Uber. So if you were to take an Uber, you might be the one who determines where you would say where you wanted to go, right? But you would trust the Uber driver to navigate the space and get you there because they know their community. So the same thing with the constraints for a superintendent is these are specific operational actions, but they're you navigating the values of your community and saying, we really want to live within these boundaries. We want you to do this work to get to student outcomes, but we want you to emphasize work in these areas because we know they're important to our communities. Okay, so that's kind of where these things live. And I know we've already talked a lot about them, but I just wanted to, so we're going to work on both of these, and you're going to do a little bit on your own or with a partner as you work through these. But the first one we're going to look at is the board self-constraint. So these are unlike student outcomes, they don't have a baseline, they don't have a target, they don't have deadlines, right? They're just really looking at the board saying, these are the ways we're going to go about business. And they're a little different than like your operating procedures, because these are like how you orchestrate your board business and keeping in tune with what you've asked your superintendent to do. So these are really about you creating the conditions for your superintendent to be a success and holding yourselves accountable to creating those conditions. Does that make sense? So these are examples of those. So the board shall not go more than 3 months without completing a self-evaluation. We recommend using the integrity instrument, the Lone Star governance instrument, because that's what this framework is based on. But you can't Really what we're saying as a board is in order for us to create the condition to evaluate our superintendent and the team's progress and do it fairly, we also need to look at ourselves as a board and say, did we honor the commitments we made to the superintendent and her team? Did we create the conditions to be success? And that's what a self-evaluation is. At the very minimum, a board should do a self-evaluation at least 3 months prior to any superintendent evaluation. So that's the, went dark. I thought it was
We could
the
see
end.
that better.
So this is something that we would recommend, or I would recommend, as a quarterly basis. You set a baseline, just like you were asking your team to do. You would have a baseline, and you would, are we holding ourselves accountable to that? Another board constraint, these are just examples, might be, so shall not direct the staff on a day-to-day operation. So that may not be something you have to remind yourself to do. But that goes back to some of those boards what I was talking about with the balance, right? If a board is on campuses telling principals how to do their job, then they're way out of their scope. They're way out of what you've agreed, and you're probably causing that principal not to focus on the work they need to be doing because they're paying attention to you as a board member. And so in which case there is a cost to the student. And so you're not creating the kind of conditions for your principal or your superintendent to be successful if you're in there. So that might be something, if that's something that is challenging, during regular scheduled board meetings, the board will not spend less than 50% of its time on progress monitoring on the student outcome goals. Now this is something we talked about earlier when I said monitoring. So if you have a 4-hour board meeting, and we'll do a little time tracker exercise. We probably won't get to it tonight, but we will do it tomorrow. I did watch your last board meeting and your last 3 board meetings. And so, if you're not talking about student outcomes, and we haven't had these goal progress measures in place, so there's a pass. But
Our baseline.
You what?
This will be our baseline.
Right. This will be your baseline. But the dialogue that you all had around these progress measures with your leadership team, that is what that 50% of the time should be. Now, of course, it's also going to include resourcing because, like, for instance, if your team comes to you and says, you know what, we really need MAP because we're not getting the kind of data that we need through this universal screener, and so we're going to show you what that is, that counts because that's aligned with your goal progress measure. But if you're spending 4 hours, a 4-hour board meeting, only talking about vendor relationships, then you probably haven't talked about student outcomes enough. So this is something that you might want to hold yourselves accountable to. The board will not deviate from the agenda once it's set 72 hours in advance. That may not be a challenge for this board, but I have seen boards where they don't know their agenda. You can't prepare for your agenda if your agenda is consistently changing, and especially if it changes last minute. Nor can your team prepare to give you the kind of data and information that you need to have good conversation and dialogue if that's a consistently changing thing. But that, once again, that may not be your challenge. And then the last one on these examples is the board will not deviate from the board's operating procedures. Once again, that's kind of it's a given that you have operating procedures and you shouldn't deviate from them, but oftentimes boards want to hold themselves accountable at a higher level. And you monitor yourself on these as well. And so they become something that is also a part of that AE local. So just like the superintendent's goals, just like the student outcome goals, the progress measures, the constraints would be there as well. So the public would see them as well, and they would say, you know what? They don't seem to be talking about student outcomes. I thought they had a constraint around that, and they could ask you a question about that. So that's kind of where these are. Any questions about that? We're going to practice them in a minute, but I want to go on to give you examples of a superintendent constraint, which is a little bit different, more of a specific action, and those are those value systems. And there's a couple of areas that when we go to the practice area that you could look at in the strategic plan that are clearly important in this district, families and communities. Those are not direct student outcome places, right? But they might be value places. They might be places where you want to have a constraint. Positive school culture, the same type of thing. Those are experiential, and those are important. If they're important enough to be in the strategic plan, then for them to be board work where you actually monitor the work on this, you need to set a constraint so that you bring it into the board work and you monitor progress on these. Does that make sense? So with the superintendent constraints, there's a lot of different ways that you could look at these. Yeah, absolutely. A lot of different ways you can look at them. This is one very specific example. And once again, this may not be the area that you want to push into, but a superintendent shall not allow the percentage of students served in low-performing campuses to increase. So this is a constraint actual constraint that is often used in big urban districts. And as you can see, just like the goals, they have a baseline and they have targets, and they are five-year. They do not have to have at the constraint level. They don't have a baseline and a target, but they do at the CPM level, which is the constraint progress measure. So they would be included in your monitoring report. So I know we've talked about, yes, go ahead, Tristan.
Are you saying when it says shall not allow the percentage of students served in a low-performing campus, you mean they're not allowing more students to enroll in that school?
Well, in this particular constraint example, what they're saying is they are diminishing low-performing campuses, so moving, either improving campuses, or, which is really what they're doing in this goal. And they're saying this could also be formed in like an A through F kind of thing. But in this particular constraint, that's what they're saying. Or, so they're committing that we will have high quality seats in every area of our district. But this is just an example. So the CPMs, the constraint progress measures, just like the GPMs, need to be predictive. They need to be influenceable by the superintendent. Another example, so this one is about teachers, because we're not measuring teachers or retention or effectiveness or any of that has to do with teachers in our student outcome goals, but we know that our teachers are incredibly important, and how we are supporting them will also probably have a fiscal note. So bringing teachers into board work through a constraint is probably a really great way to bring that into board work. And so a superintendent shall not, and they're built in this shall not kind of as this 10 commandments, because you're trying to, you're not trying to give permission. You're saying, look, stay within these boundaries. So it's not to diminish the control of a superintendent. It's to say these things are important to us, and so we're going to measure progress on these because they directly influence a student outcome, but they're not a student outcome. And we want to bring it into board work. And if you recall way back at the beginning, if you're not including this, if these, either they're not included as a goal or a constraint, or it's not a budgetary part of your business, then all of the rest of it is not board work. You determine what is board work. So if you want to see reports around teacher retention, then you need to bring it into board work. And you do that through a constraint. Just like if you want to see data on third grade literacy and look at progress, then you set a goal so that we're all moving forward. And this also says this is clear. We have said these are important things to this board and this community, and it creates transparency for your community, but it also creates transparency for your team and your superintendent. So they know these are very important value statements for my board and my community, so we're going to do very specific things, we're going to take very specific actions to make sure those are supported. Does that make sense? So on this one, it is the effective teacher turnover rate. Retention, teacher retention is obviously a huge issue for districts across the nation. Very huge. So what kind of culture, what kind of ways are you supporting your educators so that they can be effective in the classrooms and help our students move forward?
In one of our previous superintendent evaluations, this is where that goal was. And so that way the superintendent was well aware that they would be evaluated based on what turnover rate. And I think you mentioned that could easily be put there rather than here.
Right. Yeah. So these would also be a part of the superintendent evaluation, just like the student outcome goals. So we're just delineating them. Because we want to focus the goals on our student outcomes, right? But we want to, there are many actions that you want your superintendent to take to help get there. Make sense? Questions? Okay, so these are kind of examples of non-constraints. So what's wrong with these examples? That first one, what would you say is wrong with that?
Well, we wouldn't be able to, we shouldn't be enrolling students in a school that's out of their area just because it's a low-performing school. We should include the performance at the school.
Right.
If I'm reading it right.
I mean, all of them in some way are either like ethical violations or like not things
Not
that the
best practice.
superintendent should be doing,
Right.
like.
Or
yeah.
not even within their influence, right?
Exactly.
Like keep parents happy. That is a pretty general statement that is probably not
Immeasurable.
Right.
You cannot measure.
measured.
And some of them are beyond what the board should be dictating. That's
Also
not,
Right.
beyond what we should be
Yeah.
dictating.
Right.
Hire Ms. Johnson.
Do not do anything without prior approval from the board.
Yeah, that would be a really bad
Don't do your
constraint.
job.
Right. And that's the important part to remember is these are not punitive. They're value statements. These are measurable. These are about moving the needle towards improving student outcomes. So we just want to make sure that we're not setting up our superintendent to fail at anything. We're setting up our superintendent and our team to be incredibly successful. And when we bring these things into board work, then we resource them, then we pay attention to them, and their strategies move down the line. So when we look at like the strategy book here, and we talked about that, they've got, the superintendent and her team have all these action steps that they're taking. And so this might be something that you want to see, what's the progress on all of these? You're taking these actions, so we'd like to see progress. So we're going to put a constraint around that. Does that make sense? Okay, so let's try it. Let's see if there's a practice. So what I'd like you to do is with your partner, and you don't have to do it at a whiteboard. You can do it on a piece of paper. You can write it in your book. If you need paper, let me know. I'll get it to you. But I would like you to create a board self-constraint. So what is something that is important to you as a board member that you want to honor and you want to hold yourselves accountable to? And then create a superintendent constraint. And remember that, and then a constraint progress measure. And how are you going to measure that constraint? Just the superintendent constraint.
Are the examples in our book somewhere?
Yes, they are in, sorry, I have that. Let me see.
I like some of those, but I know you can't show 3 sides at once.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for your, I thought they were,
You guys be safe.
thank you so much.
Thank
Thank you
you.
for staying so long.
I'll put the examples back up because maybe I didn't put them in here. I'm sorry.
I think there's some,
Should be some in
there's
the
some
LSG.
samples starting on page 40.
Okay, good.
Well, kind of, yeah. Let me see. Board's constraints for superintendent, so this is on 42.
Okay, so in your, that's a sample of AE local, right, there's some samples. Okay, so work together in your pairs. You have a pair, and a three or two, however y'all want to do it. Thank you. You guys want to work together and you three want to work together? Or, okay.
Sure.
And you two? I'm going to go back and kind of put up those samples just in case. You don't have to write them on a flip chart, but write them down.
Occasionally.
I'm going to give you about 15 minutes-ish.
You just want us to develop one?
I want you to do one board self-constraint, one superintendent self-constraint, and one progress measure for that superintendent constraint.
So we're only doing the superintendent one right now.
One board.
One board, oh, I'm sorry, okay.
One superintendent.
That's what I thought, and then
constraint.
I only heard you say superintendent. Sorry, that's me. Okay.
Do not,
And you don't need to worry about data or things right now. We'll put data.
Yeah, one here, like,
Yeah.
the board shall operate within its laws.
Okay.
It shall not violate this or any other board adopted policy.
or should I say leave, just, anything you say that they take it as a saying that, yeah, you know.
It's like, yes, it may be important to say, like, we follow our board operations, but that's like, so, you know, and, yeah. Right.
District operation, that's all.
But if the board agrees on it, then it can be. In terms of how we hold each other accountable. I know, there's no law.
Put that right in front of
That doesn't, yeah.
And then the superintendent.
But, I mean, we defined it.
Then it's a contract.
That's true.
Judge Judy would say it's enforceable.
But there's no consequence,
But there's no
it's like,
Censure.
I don't think that the superintendent should hold important information.
And then school year to the next board meeting.
And, yeah.
I don't know how to word it. I really think
I can be there. I think there are other, like,
What do you think about that?
So,
About
study time?
I like the selfie though.
I do that.
And I like the one around time, although 50% is a lot. That would be aspirational for us, I think, but it would be good. Yeah. Yeah, you can see the time was super curious. A lot of times, like,
Oh, our baseline?
yeah.
Well, we talked about it. The table report, that was a discussion meeting when we met.
Right.
We had to go back and look at the agenda. A lot of it does apply.
Progress measure.
It's not specifically discussing progress measures, but if we talk about employees, we talk about, I mean, all of that. Yes.
Here we have board. I want to know
Like, that's what I'm talking about, like,
Find out
Something
what
to-
award critical in such a
yeah.
Did you know that one of our had a minor article? from the 11th. But we never presented.
And, I mean, maybe not every, see, that's what I gotta figure out, because
I mean, I asked about this, I sent a email. He had an ordinance.
because that's not what I'm trying to get at.
He took on control. There's no assistant principal.
She should have said maybe the whole board data of what you're in school. That's what I would think.
No. I didn't either. And I was going to be on that weird
That's just maybe it's that would just be information that everybody gets, again, just trying to word it. This reports.
way.
Right. It is a big market.
Yeah, like.
Where do you see that monitoring? Page is that?
So go to page 40. There's everything.
I went the wrong way.
Yeah. All communication. Super.
It's hard to be looking into it as much on the camera. You know, that would be the monitoring.
Are all communications from basically
Right, that's not keeping time. So how do we track? That's not where we are.
I think anything.
I think it makes sense. So we're doing that, but we also have to do a monitoring. Don't we have safety clean report?
Communication. Did she say that? And then she'll say she's doing it.
A progress monitor. So that would be, looking at the agenda, and trying to better jump in which ones. So that would be an analysis you do after each meeting.
It would be nice that the board is okay, guys okay, that would be under this.
No, I think what we do is we would look at our agenda and we would just kind of code which ones are directly related to that, to the goal, to that goal. And which ones aren't, and then we kind of break it down into, okay, we spent about this one about it, and it can be guesstimate.
Yeah.
I don't think it has to be to the 10%.
Okay, I'm not gonna stop right there.
But no,
There's no closure to it. Because like the one on the 11th, talked about, we went to this cabinet, and their superintendent took it, because I sent a 10 questions about governance, and they were talking about that, and then giving us, think perfect share time about like telling us about, or he was telling me about like that geodet assignment, and like then college is out, if we're like deviating so much, we're like spending too much time being ours, and that would think for that program, it's a great initiative, but when are we gonna prep them, when are we gonna let the parents know about it, so they can encourage their kids to get in it, if that's something they want for their child, and how we gonna there would be nothing there.
Think about like bilingual program that we have. We have this and they'll like train our people in that.
Really?
You know, like what the board does is that prefaces you on opinion.
That's pretty neat.
Yeah, yeah. And they very little work.
Yeah, because when people do their speech, they get paid, but they're not paid over. They're not as like, unless they really treat it right. And they said,
I'm not saying they can't. Good job. One.
Not trying to work on any damn parties.
running that didn't go through that.
What is their population, do you know?
Dallas suburbs.
Okay,
So,
okay.
I don't know
I was gonna say, they might
I
have
think, yeah, middle class to upper middle class.
Okay, so they're
That's
like
very mature of them.
predictive of that constraint. So, like, how would you know? You don't have to use numbers or anything, but how would, is this your? Okay, if you wanted to, you know, how would you know this is happening? Like, how would you want to know how that's happening?
Well, she told me.
You know, I was trying, you know, I'm trying to be specific. I need to be specific. I need to be specific.
Yes. Right, right.
The issues that were presented.
Okay, as opposed to just like, oh, but this will be the report on any student that is aligned with the goals will always come to the board in the board meeting, in a monitoring report. Heard it from me differently?
No, heard of the conversation. So maybe this was.
No, so I'm going to give them, the team, a progress report template, and like what you were talking about, but they're going to come back. Here's an example. Okay, so
Yeah, you're right.
You're super rich, yeah.
and then a progress measure.
Yeah.
They'll show you where you are.
Yeah, she talks about
That will be every.
I wouldn't doubt that at all. What about round robin?
You would want to know if you're trying to plan, so think of it in terms of
Leanne.
So, the superintendent shall not
Lewis.
by closure of gates less than 48 hours, 36 hours, what do you want, what's your time?
What do you want the quick turnaround closure?
48 hours, I think that's fair.
So, then you have.
Well, actually, you get the information on Fridays, every Friday, so it has to be 7
Yes, yes, yes.
So then you would put it in that shall not. So then,
they're not like interviewing him, it's just like recording the board meeting as like
it's
background.
not your responsibility to monitor.
You'd like
to say, okay, over the last.
Yeah, I remember reading about that.
See, you're still talking about this, I'm talking about, let me finish it.
Yeah, well, we say.
with less than 72 hours notice.
Is he sick or?
I don't
I
know.
don't think that's they're like.
Okay.
This is also something that could be,
That's what this was.
I mean,
That goal would be
that's what you're.
the 50%.
Yes, that one we thought.
And we would measure by.
We're
really looking
Time
at
spent on agenda
like,
items.
are they values?
Well, not
The-
even just agenda items, but how.
Not just the board, but the district.
The agenda items.
Just do the outcome.
Right. Because if it's the board, it's going to change different ways.
What is the impact of your
Well, and it's been very, what's the word I want? Presumptive.
Yeah, exactly, like check.
Yeah. And I'm truly realistic about your effort is everything. About everything. Well, we have to do superintendent one.
Well, the superintendent, oh, that was the one. Okay, got it.
That's an operating procedure. I mean, you can have the same use in there. A lot of districts have working sessions. They're open. Yeah. So that, you know, so it's just essentially like you have like you might have a board meeting on Tuesday nights, right? Thursday. So you have a working session.
I'm getting it almost 18 years on Wednesday.
I'm planning to be there already.
Definitely,
I saw your picture and TASB posted photos of all the administrative assistants on Instagram. Yeah, they had a little video and I saw you sitting right up front paying attention. And I commented on it. I said, there's our wonderful Betty Holmes. Holmesies.
They're early, so I can get up front seat if I like to be with the centers or I don't like to be
Yeah.
behind people.
Short people have to see.
And then people start talking, and then like, in front of a projector, because it's something about turning your head and looking at the projector for hours. I can't. I have to leave it right now.
TASB photos.
You could write that as a board constraint, and you could actually write the working session into a board constraint. It will still go in operating, but it's not a superintendent.
No, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I think that's it.
The one with that I'm
Either of
not
those
mad.
could be addressed as board
Oh,
constraint.
there it is. Kind of.
Yeah.
In the operating procedures, which we probably need to go through and rework.
That was in a
You were
breakout session,
focused.
because they were right
Yeah.
I
around.
was just gonna say, but it's
You don't look mad, you look like you're
more
thinking.
like
And that's
culture,
Nancy,
equity,
she's
teachers,
Siggy and I So I used to see her all over the region planning, and we
Quit going every single one.
I'm just excited with it. I liked some of the examples they had. They were different than the ones that she had on.
Oh, that she had before.
Closing of our agenda, but they did it first.
and those were in response to
I
some
kind
notes
of
that
like
they
this,
sent.
that we are here to learn stuff, this is good information.
My Friday notes, I always send out Friday notes.
That's awesome. Anyway, so I said, look, I see a wonderful Betty Holmes there.
We just received it.
I only see it from like way back there.
Yeah.
Some beautifully talented kids, we really do.
We'll come into those with the
Mhm.
that'll be part of the progress measures.
Our middle school kids.
I know.
Yeah.
So maybe some of this will get through the structure.
I did.
I feel weird thinking of myself, like, dying right now, but it's.
I like to hang
Let's
up.
wrestle with that one. I see what you're trying to do, is just be more efficient.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Yeah, they should always.
Okay, good. Because I don't want to touch on it.
No, to go south.
I'm looking at the strengths of the superintendent, just to kind of look.
Either way, I want it on the side. I like to dip in it because it has specifics.
I usually don't.
Sometimes sandwiches.
I usually just let it
Yeah.
go.
A little bit too much, and I'm like,
You know, 'cause like stuff like this right here, you get the stain. I just send a question and ask, was there any damage?
Low performing.
You know, I like being notified that we had the water. And we had to do that work. Was there any damage?
Low performing.
Three or two?
Two as in one piece.
You guys need a few more minutes?
Okay.
Okay, I'll give you guys
I think you're
3 or
right.
4 more minutes. You sound like you're already there. You've got your board, your superintendent, and your CPM.
Well, we don't have a CPM for the superintendent yet. That's what
Okay,
we're working on.
You're working on,
Mhm.
okay, cool. Are you guys good? You got all
So
3
your
years?
CPM would be
2 of 3, is that good?
measure the number of students.
Two out of 3.
Come on,
We're comfortable with that.
be overachievers.
okay, my chicken scratch. This is
Okay. All right.
And then the second one is,
Treated and equitably. Okay, so
Yeah.
maybe what, on this one, what you could do is, okay, I see what you're saying here, so maybe think of in terms like, what would you want to see for progress to know that that's happening?
in my opinion, that same thing as to B,
What's
C,
this?
that would be equity and resources as a program throughout the district.
No, I like it.
That would mean to me, so when we look at that measurement, is that being met? Are there being, if there's tutoring at this level, is there tutoring at
I guess, yeah. And then also, I guess, looking at the program.
It's in Live
The
Oak.
percentages.
It's very near the park. If you go down
Well,
the
that could be a
street,
progress way,
And
because what
go,
you could say is, you know, you would disaggregate it
sign that's by
by student population.
the
I
big
think it's welcome. You might
Welcome
say,
Drive.
Yeah,
what
yeah,
percentage
Yeah,
no,
you go,
okay,
you
that's
turn
good.
left and then you see.
maybe a percentage of,
One of my
you know,
coworkers.
black and Hispanic students enrolled in this, and this, or SPED, or however you want to do it. You can even have it with all, and so you're just tracking AP.
And so.
And you can even have as a second progress measure is, you know, how many AP classes are being offered at every campus, right? So then you would know, like if there's,
But that would be way.
if it's not equitable now, then the progress would be, did we move the needle here? Did we offer more in these campuses that didn't have as many? And that's the progress we're going to see. And did we enroll more students in populations that aren't taking those classes? That would be the progress,
It depends on the
right?
different units they have at school. I wouldn't imagine that.
Student-teacher ratio at one campus, on the other, you have an equity, so
Yeah.
basically it's free.
Park Village and Hartman and Fischel is probably closer to.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a lot of measures, right? So you might just pick like 2 or 3 that are really important, like the ones you just talked about, and those would be the CPMs. Those would be your progress. And we can word them however, but if you said, kids enrolled in AP.
And we don't have those at Everett.
Kids
Right.
with,
But I wouldn't actually drag all the way up.
you know, dual credit offerings, AP, whatever you want, or kids with, you know, class ratios.
What are you writing at the
If you
measure?
wanted to do that, something
Right,
like that.
number
There's,
of low performing.
I mean, there's also,
That is a CPM?
yeah, that's a CPM. So then you would see progress, that this is happening, and we're deploying strategies to move these. Does that make sense? So that's why these become that kind of structure.
Thank you.
And then ours is the 50% time on, 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 50% time on,
have a copy of,
Progress record.
yeah, so how they took things and some of those, like,
Thank you.
and I think we just have like a standard.
Okay, maybe 1 or 2 more minutes.
There's some stuff that's their goals, they're looking at their goals to see which one of these agenda items fits into that.
Right.
Yeah. And that's how they, you know.
Yeah.
And so when we set our agenda,
Right.
then we'd be coding those.
Yeah.
Right.
And then we would
Then we
know
could track the
what we
time.
are being,
Mhm.
that we're trying to
My chicken's got through.
Okay. Come on, one of these. It's big and all right. So let's see if we can, before we leave tonight, let's see if we have what you have for your board constraints. And then we're going to try and write down what you have for your superintendent constraints, and then I'll take them home and craft them a little bit, and then I'll bring them back to you tomorrow. How's that? Either way. So these are going to be board. Okay. What did you guys have?
The board shall not direct staff.
Not direct staff.
On day-to-day operations.
Okay. One. You guys want to go? Do you have one?
Yeah, we had during regularly scheduled board meetings, the board will not spend less than 50% of its time progress monitoring the student outcome goals and constraints.
Okay.
The 50% of time one.
I'm not going to write that whole.
Yeah.
Shall not or shall?
Shall not spend less than 50%.
Oh, that.
less than.
Right.
Okay. Did you have one?
Yeah, but ours straddles operating procedure and a board constraint, so we'll flesh it out. So the board shall have a pre-board meeting, work session to review the agenda in full,
Okay.
as a full board.
So,
So if we're having a board meeting on Thursday,
right.
we're going to get together to do a full agenda review with staff, obviously, before then.
That one, like a work session, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Would you please read that?
Well, it's not
Aloud.
really written as a constraint. Board has a pre-session or a work session prior to the board meeting. So I need to think about that one, if that fits into the constraints or if it goes into operating procedures. The board has you certainly get to decide if you want to have a work session, and there are many boards that do. So I think if the goal is because you feel like you're not getting complete information and you want to make sure you have the time to digest it and to have dialogue around it prior to a board meeting, is that what you're trying to get to?
Yeah.
And then not have to have that dialogue in a board meeting?
Correct. As long as the work session is still an open session.
Okay, as long as what's in
The
it?
work session is an open session, right?
Yeah, they would have to be open. Yeah, so it's essentially just saying, we're gonna have dialogue, but we're gonna move it over here instead of over here. And so I guess my question would be, to what end?
Ask me a different way. Ask me a different way.
Ask you a different question?
Ask me
different way.
Different way.
Why would it be beneficial to do that in a pre-board meeting rather than at the board meeting?
Because we're not going to take action at a work session. We're going to get all the information, ensure that we can discuss it, have it sit, we digest it, and then at the agenda, at the actual full board, we then vote on it. It's a practice that's done by many boards.
It's kind of like
And
a
it's-
pre-ARD meeting, you know, kind of staffing.
But it allows for like a quasi less intense session to occur, for us to dialogue, get squared away, and then have a more efficient actual board meeting and vote.
I have a question for Mr. Diaz. Would that type work session be an open session?
Have to be.
Has to be.
And it would be posted, and an agenda would be posted just like a regular board meeting? But that particular session is only for the purpose of getting information with the supporting documents that we get in our agenda, in our board room.
With staff to talk us through the items.
So the way I've seen it done is, and there's quite a few districts that do it, is that's where the staff comes and makes presentations. That's where you could have outside people make presentations if you're considering, you know, bringing someone in. And then you do not have that at your board meeting. Your board meeting is about taking action, and you can still have questions and ask your questions, and, you know, obviously there'll still be some staff, but it isn't about presentations. So at your board meeting, you would not be getting presentations from the team or anyone else. You would have an agenda of things you've already discussed, and you would vote, and you could still ask questions, obviously, in there, but you'd have to go back to the materials. Does that make sense? So this is a working session. It makes it a little... Sorry. It would make it a little bit more, you know, it is a working session, right? It's where people come in. It's where you get to ask all the questions, where you have presentations, you would see it. But when you go to the board meeting, that's when you would get the goal monitoring reports. All of that would be in the board meetings. So you would only talk about student outcomes and constraints in your board meeting and your budget, you know, your regular stuff. And your vote, obviously.
I have another question for Mr. Diaz. Would that include just consent?
All my understanding.
Everything on the agenda?
Right. And but again, I say that from viewing it from an outsider's perspective, because I know that Edgewood, Fort Worth, Dallas maybe have done it, so they had these sessions because they needed the sessions.
And even city council, San Antonio, they'll have an A
Yeah,
session.
there are some other municipalities that have multiple sessions.
They're both open to the public, both recorded, all of them. I mean, it's completely transparent. It's simply a deeper dive. And so the trade-off is, you know, you might spend 6 hours in a working session or 4 hours, depending how much you have.
How much dialogue there is.
But and then you only may have a 50-minute or an hour and a half board meeting, right? So it's just a, you know, it's kind of, it's really what would be best for you.
Right, the way I've also seen it done is from that agenda, big chunks of it are done. I have not seen I've not seen like the whole agenda, but I've seen big chunks of it done, but not necessarily the entire agenda.
In a working session?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I know Southwest does their brown bags once a month, and it's big chunks of it, not the entire agenda, but big
chunks that the board wants to dialogue on.
Right.
Does Southwest do exceptional governance or others change?
I don't know.
It's where you could go really deep into some, like, strategies to get you to your goals, like a new strategy or a new implementation or new challenges or bond dialogue or all of those things, presentations from your budget team, so presentations from, an innovation team, all of those things, equity team, all of those things could come into that. And then you're right, at the board meeting, then it's primarily a consent agenda, but there are still going to be times where you'll have non-consent, items pulled out of it. That
The other neat thing, but I think it's a different board, that they're able to do it during the day.
right, it is during the day.
I can't do that.
I know, I'm just.
No, I know.
Who
do they have for their board?
Well, see, that is also a challenge, right? Because
It
then it
is.
starts to speak to barriers to board service.
Right, yeah.
So it's just, you can have it in the evenings, but you got
Gotta make sure everyone's
You know.
available. so-
But
Well, and staff as well, we have to consider them too.
Yeah, they've been working.
Well,
on it.
the idea is that the staff,
Then
that's
does it
why
come
they have
together
it during the
meeting? Right,
day.
that's
is
why
the
they do it
staff
during the
goes to
day.
the working
Right.
session and they don't have to
Mhm.
be at the board meeting.
Right.
But
Except
as
for
long
Keith.
as it
You
wouldn't
do,
be new
but-
questions, because, what I had shared was, I truly don't mind the agenda, any agenda item, consent, I don't mind anything being pulled. Because of COVID, what has happened is I've given a lot of latitude that people go and watch it from home. So lately, people said, can I watch it from home, Dr. Paul? Sure, no problem. But if I know that it's going to be pulled ahead of time, I do ask that person come in person, just because they might know some intricacies that I don't know.
Right.
So that's why I like knowing ahead of time, just so I know who to have.
Right.
Right.
And you would still know ahead of time. You would still need to do that, right? I would say that this is something that warrants a lot more dialogue for you guys, and is probably not a board constraint. It's probably more of a, like, we're really
is how we
changing this,
operate,
and this is an
yeah.
operational change. So,
What I think I'm hearing, just so I know, and I can start preparing, is I think I hear that the board would like more board workshops based on the agenda.
No,
Oh, okay.
no workshop.
I'm not saying
Oh, okay, I just wanted to double check,
But we just talked about what the work session.
Yeah.
Same thing.
She said workshop. I envision,
Work session,
Yes.
workshop.
No.
I think she's using both.
I'm going to take offense to that. No, I'm just kidding. I'm joking.
hours of my evening, like, good Lord.
Work
Say-
session,
say
right?
more to that, what did you?
So I was thinking, like, let's say we have a topic that I feel the board feels that we really want to learn on and delve deep in and have more discussion. We would have what I would call a board workshop. I could call it something else, a board workshop.
Informational session.
Yes.
But not necessarily aligned to the agenda?
Yes, it would be on the agenda the following month, but let's dig deep first before it gets to the agenda.
And so in some of the, so you'd have it every month. So
Yeah, we have it every month.
So it is a work session, right?
Yeah, we have it every month. It just wouldn't be the entire agenda, but 2 or 3 critical things that are going to be on the agenda that are student outcomes, that are based on our goals, that we really spend some more time truly dialoguing it, presenting information, having more conversation about it. No?
The other
It
part
doesn't
of,
solve what I'm trying to solve, but I hear what you're saying.
Okay, but I thought that isn't aligned? No? Okay.
And it
That's
would have
not-
to be the full agenda, because every board member values something different on the agenda. So it would have to be the full agenda. I don't know if personnel would be on there, you know how we approve personnel the day of, or if it would have to. But certainly the other issues, everything from discussion, consent, we would walk through it.
So tell me, Mr. Diaz, so I can understand a little bit more.
Trying to solve for that. So, for example, give the space for any member to talk or to be walked through consent and avoid what happened last week. If we had a full agenda review from staff, that could potentially cure a lot of questions that arise on the day of in a more high-stakes setting, which triggered what we saw on Thursday. A work session diffuses a lot of that by allowing us to discuss it in an open session, but a little more intimately with staff on hand. And then by the time we get to voting, it's a little more, I'm gonna take that back. It is a more efficient, effective pathway for us to execute our duty. That's what I'm trying to solve for.
It also gives a little bit of space and time, if what I'm hearing, to digest it, so that you're not having to make those decisions on the night of the vote, right? You get to think about it. And in some cases, the dialogue, doesn't come to conclusion in the work session, and those don't end up on the agenda because they're not ready to be on the agenda. So that would be the only other thing I would see. I mean, there's both pros and cons, right? But I think that is definitely a conversation that is an board operating conversation that you all need to, we can have, but not in this constraint
I
conversation.
just thought about something else. If we were to get a general consensus of everybody wanting to do that, then we would know if there were items that were on consent, let's say, that should be moved to another area, and maybe not consent.
Well, and it also,
if we had that work session.
it also takes away a little bit of the challenge that I've heard in the board meetings, and I've heard from board members too, is, that like in that work session, you get to talk about what's on that consent agenda together, right? It's not a separate meeting. It's not a separate time that you have to go. You talk about the consent agenda together, and then you all decide, okay, this is going to go on the board meeting's consent agenda. We've all had this dialogue. We've all talked. We've all got to have input on it. This is what the consent agenda will look like in the next board meeting. So it could solve some of the challenges around that as well.
Now, the time frame of when that type of work session would happen versus when we have the board meeting, how soon would we need to do a session like that if we were to all agree to that?
Most
that
of them are
affects
done the
your-
same week.
Like
Yeah.
a Monday and Thursday.
Yeah, Monday or Tuesday and Thursday. Monday or
It would
Tuesday.
have to be the week before in order for us to.
Well, that's what I'm saying, because we know
If it
already
changed the
now,
agenda.
Okay.
It is set when we get our board books.
Then
We know when they're
Then maybe it's a Thursday and a Thursday.
But,
Tuesday and Thursday.
honestly, I think we could also solve the problem is just limiting what's on the consent agenda.
That's what I'm saying, that if we did that session, we may find that there are things on the consent that maybe should not be there, or could be moved to a different section of the agenda.
Or really just saying, hey, Dr. Ball, you know what, the only things that we want on the consent agenda, because we want so much more dialogue, are the minutes and proclamations.
I mean,
Well, this is where that challenge gets to, is board constraint, which is this.
I'm just throwing it out there. I'm not
Right,
saying
no,
yes or
it's a clear point,
I'm
but
just throwing it out.
But if you have a 6-hour board meeting or a 4-hour board meeting, and 3 of it is talking about non-consent items that have nothing to do with student outcomes, then you're not honoring this board constraint. So some of the things maybe, you have to decide what goes on the consent and what doesn't go on a consent agenda. I mean, a consent agenda should be things that are like you've already thought about, right? They're like, I don't want to say no-brainers, but they're more things that you've already thought about, right? They're things that, okay, yes, we know this. We're gonna approve this. Whereas the non-consent agenda is the stuff that you really do have questions, and it should be around student outcomes or superintendent constraints or progress, and it should be, or money, fiscal notes, things like that that are high, that are aligned to this.
And maybe this is just a question for the board. Maybe the board doesn't really like how the board agenda is set right now. Maybe maybe the board is also looking for a different way to set the board agenda.
Well, we do know that that is one idea because it came from Mr. Diaz. So he is saying yes, that he thinks that there's room for improvement. Speaking for myself, I don't have a problem with the way the agenda is set, other than sometimes when I say to you, maybe we ought to move this from consent to discussion. Other than that, I don't have any qualms.
Stuff like the Hall of Fame could be on consent. I mean,
Excuse me?
the Hall of Fame.
Hall of Honor.
Yeah, Hall of Honor, it could be
Should
on
or should
consent.
not?
It doesn't have any direct impact on academic outcomes, the Hall of Honor. So consent item, things like that, that is to the point. We need to talk about academic outcomes. That's what I would think. There is a place for it. I've actually got some feedback from different leaders in the community. Some eliminated their entire consent. They said, we go line by line and we just vote on every one of them. But I do see things like minutes, Hall of Honor, things like that, proclamations, all that is mundane stuff that can be voted in one. But as long as we have the ability to pull, I'm fine with that. And so I'm answering the question with my colleagues here. That one that I pulled with ESSER funds that had ESL and ESSER, was that given to the board at did I miss that opportunity to discuss that line item at some other meeting?
No.
Okay, so, because that's why I pulled it. Normally, I wouldn't pull expenditures of $50,000 or more. That's one of those usually that just go through. But I had questions about the outcomes of that. So, thank you for clarifying that.
Okay, so we're kind of over our time. But this is a good, healthy discussion, and I think it warrants more dialogue. So if you want, if you want,
Wake up.
if you want, we can slate that in for more dialogue tomorrow, or we can stay on what we're working on, and we can address operating procedures at the end of when we get through constraints and we get through monitoring. Then we can go to operating procedures, and I can bring you some examples from other boards if that would be helpful, both for agenda review and for work sessions. Would that be helpful?
Okay, yes.
Okay, so if you did a superintendent constraint, can I have it? And I'll take it and work.
Write it down.
You did a good job.
Thank you.
Can you read my scratch?
I'll manage. Thank you.
You know which one it is, so it's.
Yeah, I'll bring them back to you, so, yeah. All right, thank you so much. This was great work tonight. I look forward to seeing you again tomorrow night.
Thank you, Patricia. And you do want us to, hold on.
Yeah, bring it back.
Yes, or if you forget them, you can give them to Betty.
Yeah, I'm looking in there,
No, I'll
okay.
just leave it in my car and then.
I put it on
Yeah,
my
I'll leave
board
it in my
seat,
car.
so it should be right there on my board seat.
Yes.
You can stand up. Oh, yeah.